What is modern standard Arabic? What are its sources?
I did not even know that there was a difference between colloquial Arabic and classical Arabic.
How far can you drift from the original language before you're categorized as another language?
What's the difference between a living language and a dead language? A dead language, Latin, Sanskrit, and Ancient Greek are dead languages. You might argue they're not natural languages, so they're learned languages. 99% of those who know these languages do not use them to formulate and express their thoughts.
Why is this even important, right? Like, they're so close. When we get into it, what are the categories of differences between classical Arabic and modern standard Arabic?
One of my first Arab friends, he told me that he used to have Moroccan friends. Sometimes it got so bad that they were forced to switch to Al-Fusha because they could not understand each other's dialects.
Moroccan language is actually a mix of 4 languages. It's a mix of Arabic, it's a mix of French, it's a mix of Amazigh, and then it's also a mix of Spanish.
What is a natural language? A natural language is a language that children acquire automatically, intuitively from their parents, siblings, friends, relatives, everybody they encounter in real life.
What is the danger? Why do we need to separate out classical Arabic and modern standard Arabic? And why should the difference between classical Arabic and modern standard Arabic matter? Hey everyone. Today I'm honored to welcome Sheikh Ahmed Abdul Ghani. Born in Boston, trained at Jamia Dar al-Ulum Karachi and the University of Chicago, with a background in Arabic and Semitic linguistics, philosophy, and traditional Islamic scholarship. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Today we'll be discussing the difference between classical Arabic, modern standard Arabic, and colloquial Arabic, and how each one fits into the living history of the language. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any future conversations. Without any further ado, let's get into the first question. So we'll start by setting the stage and setting definitions on what is classical Arabic, what is modern standard Arabic, what is colloquial Arabic, so that we can have clear definitions for each. So to start off, Sheikh Ahmed, what is classical Arabic?
It's essentially a matter of definition. People, of course, come up with conventional labels for things to make it easier to communicate amongst each other so there's no miscommunication. People refer to the language, essentially, of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his time, his era, as classical Arabic. That could have been spoken by the Prophet himself, the people before him, his parents, his grandparents, people after him, but I would add shortly after him, and I'll explain why in a second. So essentially the language of the Quran, the Hadith, and the classical poetry, the Jahiliyyah or the pre-Islamic poetry. Why did I say the people shortly after him? Why didn't I say shortly before him as well? Because the rate at which a language changes can vary. And all languages change. Look at Latin, look at ancient Greek. A modern Greek person would not be able to understand Plato. A modern Italian would not be able to understand Virgil. But the rate at which a language changes is influenced by different factors. And in the case of Arabic, due to the sudden spread of Islam and the vast number of converts to Islam who were attempting to learn Arabic, the language changed very rapidly. So very, very soon after the passing away of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the sudden expansion of Islam and the sudden deluge of non-Arabs, Persians and Egyptians, etc., trying to learn Arabic, the Arabic language underwent a massive change. So much so that those people who were Arabs, their own children started speaking Arabic in a way that their parents considered incorrect. But anyway, that's the broad area, the broad time span of classical Arabic.
Okay, so classical Arabic is built upon, one is you have the Quran, you have all the literature that survived from that time period, with some plus and some minus, right? And I think that is usually called asl al-ihtijaj in Arabic. How would you say that in English?
Once again, it's a matter of definition, because somebody might extend that corpus and say, no, I want to go further back in time or further forward in time. But I would say the corpus that the people of that time, of Prophet Muhammad's immediate audience, that they were familiar with, that would be the corpus of classical Arabic, the attested corpus of classical Arabic.
Got it. So in this podcast, we're trying to tackle the difference between classical Arabic and modern standard Arabic. And both of these are commonly called Fusha, right? So you have many videos, you have many people who talk about the differences between classical Arabic or Fusha and Ammiya, right? The colloquial dialects. But you don't really see too much discussion on, at least not in the public sphere, on the differences between Fusha and Modern Standard Arabic. So before we get into the differences, what is Modern Standard Arabic and what are its sources?
MSA is essentially a label for the language of educated Arabs in the Arab world, the contemporary Arab world, the language that is used in the media for education. That's probably the most important point, because how you're educated shapes how you speak later on in life. And it's the language that Arabs who speak mutually unintelligible varieties of colloquial Arabic use to communicate with each other. For example, many years ago, when I was a complete beginner, and I was very naive and I assumed that Arabic is just Arabic, so much so that not only did I not know that there was a difference between MSA, Modern Standard Arabic, and CA, Classical Arabic, I did not even know, and you laugh at this, I laugh at so many years later, I did not even know that there was a difference between Colloquial Arabic and Classical Arabic. I was a teenager, 16 years old. What could you expect? So one of my first Arab friends, he told me that he used to have Moroccan friends. And sometimes it got so bad that they were forced to switch to al-Fusha. He used al-Fusha. He just used the term al-Fusha to communicate to each other because they could not understand each other's dialects. So MSA is the language that Arabs of today use to communicate with each other, especially when they cannot understand each other's dialects.
So then you have people like you mentioned in Morocco, and their language is actually, we call it like we call it an Arabic dialect, but this is another question, like how far can you drift from the original language before you're categorized as another language? So the Moroccan language is actually a mix of four languages. It's a mix of Arabic, it's a mix of French, it's a mix of Amazigh, which is one of the Berber languages, and then it's also a mix of Spanish. There's been so much influence on this language, and they'll shift between words from each one, and not only words, but also like qawalib, which is the templates, right? The sentence structures. So it's pretty interesting, and many Arabs will just say, no, the Maghribi language or the Moroccan language, that's not even Arabic. So yes, but one interesting thing I've actually noticed about Moroccans, and shout out to all the Moroccans, that when you talk to them, like when you talk to, for example, a common Shami Arab, right, or a Levantine Arab, so because their dialect is much closer to Fusha than Moroccans, you actually see that sometimes they'll mix a lot between the two, and they don't feel the need to know Fusha that much because or study it independently or speak it independently, because their language you can already figure, it's already very close. But with Moroccans, because their language is actually quite far, they when you speak to Moroccans, you find a big population from them who, when they speak Fusha much better than like I feel that the common Moroccan, and obviously these are my experiences, but in general, the common Moroccan man speaks more Fusha, more Modern Standard Arabic, more clearly than the other Arabs, because of the distance between his dialect and that. So that's an interesting point that I observed. So now coming to colloquial Arabic, we set the stage for classical Arabic, for modern standard Arabic, and now for colloquial Arabic. What is it that defines colloquial Arabic?
Colloquial Arabic is, as the name implies, the language that a child grows up hearing his mother, his parents speak, especially the mother, of course, because mothers generally spend more time with their with the children. Therefore, they're speaking more to the children. But of course, the parents, the siblings, if there are any, because the family, friends, everybody. The language that the child grows up speaking naturally is his is the colloquial dialect, and they're not standardized. There are attempts at standardization. For example, the Egyptian dialect, there have been in recent years some textbooks produced for teaching the Egyptian dialect. But coming back to your question, whatever an Arab child grows up speaking naturally is a colloquial dialect. And I should also add that because in general they're not standardized, therefore they vary not only from country to country, but even from town to town, from village to village. Therefore, it's a continuum, like colors, a spectrum. That's a pretty good description of dialects, and not just in the Arab world. This is wherever there has been not much communication up until recently. You can go to Turkey, you can go to Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, China, wherever. It's basically a spectrum. It gradually moves. Punjabi gradually shades into Saraiki, which gradually turns into Sindhi, which gradually turns into Memon, which turns into Gujarati, and it keeps on changing gradually and imperceptibly.
Yeah, so it's a living language, or it's multiple living languages essentially, that are constantly evolving. And as we know, a language precedes its grammar, right, all the time. So every single day, you can say every single dialect is being reinvented. Every time a new word comes in, every time there's any sort of influence on it, anytime there's a structural change, like in a template, a shift. So, for example, the Amiya, the colloquial Arabic in Morocco of today versus 50 years ago, it would be slightly different. We're not saying it would be 100% different, but certainly there will be slight shifts that have happened. Would you agree with that, that the dialects change over time?
Absolutely. I know from my personal experience that it is the spoken varieties that change because the written varieties are standardized. By definition, they cannot change. How can Sanskrit change? If it's a dead language, then it can't really change, right? Latin cannot really change. How would it
So
change?
a language, once it's been formalized, right?
Mhm.
And like essentially we can call it frozen, right? Once it's been like it's fossilized now, it's frozen. So now it is immune to change to the degree that it's been fossilized, right? So with these colloquial dialects, like you mentioned, for example, Egyptian Arabic is taught, but even if they teach it, they have to anchor it to something.
To a limited extent, it is taught. In the Arab world, the Arabs kind of disregard the colloquial dialects and for good reason, because if you think about it, why would you want to learn a colloquial dialect if al-Fusha, which is the umbrella term that encompasses both classical Arabic and modern standard Arabic, if al-Fusha suffices for communication? Yet, if you want to eavesdrop, that's totally different. For example, and I can speak from my own experience, that in Lahore, which is the capital of Punjab, Western Punjab, I should add, not Indian Punjab, everybody knows Urdu over there. And as a result, people are often shocked, they're quite shocked when they find out that I know many languages, like I would say like about 16, but Punjabi is not one of them. And they say, you lived in Lahore for so many years and you didn't learn the language of Lahore, and you've never been to Germany or France, and you know German, French, Italian, whatever. That doesn't make any sense. And I say, actually, it's a matter of utility. If everybody in Lahore, if 99% of Lahore knows Urdu, then that means that if you go to the storekeeper, your local storekeeper, or for that matter, a storekeeper in a village, and you want to buy something and you speak Urdu, he will reciprocate. So why would I want to learn Punjabi? If I want to eavesdrop on two people from Lahore, that's different. If you want to eavesdrop on two Moroccans, by all means learn the dialect of that village, because even within the same country, the dialects will vary. But coming back to your question, yes. So the dialects have not been standardized, but in the West, I emphasize in the West, there are attempts to promote the dialects, so much so that now there are actually formal courses, accredited courses being offered, that will teach you Egyptian colloquial, Levantine colloquial. And I should also add that the Egyptian dialect is far and away the most widely understood form of Arabic after Al-Fusha. Al-Fusha is, of course, the language of education.
And this is because of the film industry, right?
Exactly. I should say media in general. It could be songs, sitcoms, movies, and therefore I have met Arabs who have never set foot in Egypt, and they can understand colloquial Egyptian just as well as they know Al-Fusha, and in fact, they can even speak it to an extent.
Yeah, and also the point that you mentioned that 15 languages, I think we need to have a separate episode, just for that, that you're a polyglot, you've studied all these languages. So definitely we can have a discussion on, your journey as, learning languages, but we'll reserve another time for that. That is something that requires its own time. So now, there's something maybe I'm gonna some things that I'll push back on, but it's, I'll draw from your knowledge and your years of experience. But in terms of like when we say um, colloquial Arabic, or let's just start from classical Arabic. So usually we know these three categories, right? One is we say classical Arabic, the second is modern standard Arabic, and the third is colloquial Arabic. But when I was, as I was preparing for this interview and I was also, doing my research, my prep, um, it occurred to me that like when we analyze, there are many indications, not only indications, strong evidences and proofs that in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there were many dialects spoken at that time, right? And I think Alama Suyuti, he's a famous Islamic scholar, he mentions that there were like 40 dialects spoken at that time, with obviously that was also a continuum, that was also a spectrum. And then you could have had like in those 40, you would have had you would have had one group which was unadulterated. So those were all, you can say, maybe they would have all considered all the Arabs would have considered those um, pure Arabic, even if they're different. And then there could have been some Arabic, which is maybe in the Ghasasina, some people are living near the Roman Empire, some people are living in different areas where there's more of a mix. So maybe they feel that they're a bit more adulterated. But whatever it is, there were many dialects that were considered unadulterated. And when you look at classical Arabic, which is preserved, that seems to have a bias and a leaning. That could we say that formalized classical Arabic is a subset of the entire Arabic ecosystem, the classical Arabic ecosystem. So can we separate classical Arabic into two more categories, where one is like the classical Arabic ecosystem, of which not everything was recorded, not everything was fossilized, not everything was formalized. And then you have classical Arabic, which was the fossilized version. Can you speak to this? And then I'll come back to the point that I want to challenge regarding today's colloquial dialects.
You hit the nail on the head. So in linguistics, we talk about diachronic linguistics and synchronic linguistics. As the name implies, so chronos in Greek means time, chronometer, like a fancy word for a watch. Syn means together. So synchronic means at the same time. Dia means across, through. So diachronic linguistics studies how a language changes through time. Dia, through, chronos, time. Diachronic linguistics is basically how a language changed over time, right? For example, in the Indian subcontinent, how Sanskrit evolved into Prakrit. I don't want to go into the history of Sanskrit, and eventually gave birth to all these languages that we now know: Punjabi, Gujarati, Bengali, Marathi, Sindhi, etc. But then so everybody knows about that. Well, most people do. But then synchronic linguistics, a lot of people don't know about that, including, I did not know about that back in the day as well. So it's useful to think of it as a videotape, a video. If you pause the video, even in that one frame, in that one picture, it's the still picture, you pause the video of Arabic 14 centuries ago, it's not uniform because there are different dialects spoken by different tribes. Why? Why is it that there's variation within one frame, not across time at that one moment? Because this happens that languages change over time, and when communication is poor, the language will change in different ways in different areas. Of course, if everybody were living on one small island, the language would still change, but at least the change would be uniform. It would change in the same way across the island. But the Arabian Peninsula was anything but some place where you could just, the communication was not good. In stark contrast to the Roman Empire, where you had excellent roads. The Persian Empire, they had really good roads, whatever. The communication was much better over there. So yes, which you have hit on you touched on a very important topic, synchronic variation. So you're right, even 14 centuries ago, if you pause the video, you have variation, synchronic variation, absolutely.
So in a way, this is just like variation across space.
Across space.
Okay. So you have variation across time, which is more linear, and then you have variation across space. So, and what you mentioned is that, okay, the Arabian Peninsula, you couldn't just get up and go from one place to the other necessarily so easily. So communication may not have been as good because of the travel or difficulty of travel. So this lends itself to as proof even further that there would have been multiple dialects. So now let's like if we talk again about the fossilized classical Arabic, what was the subset or what was the portion of this ecosystem that was preserved and why?
Essentially, after the spread of Islam, the Quran naturally became the model par excellence for imitation. That and the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ. So, quite naturally, the Arabs who did not speak this dialect would have striven to imitate it. And even if some Arabs had tried to preserve the dialect, they would have found it very difficult to do so for the simple reason that being Muslim, they would have been reciting the Quran. They might not everybody would have necessarily memorized the Quran, but at least they would be listening to it 5 times a day, probably more, reciting it as well. And therefore, it's going to have an influence on your language if you're listening to it day in and day out, right? And furthermore, even if some people were trying to be maybe a bit stubborn, a bit nationalistic or tribalistic, whatever, and wanted to preserve their language, which they have a right to do, they would still have been surrounded by people who would have said, forget it. We don't need to speak the way our parents spoke. We need to speak the way Muhammad and Allah speak, right? So they would have been fighting a losing battle, right? And you can see that in today's world as well. Whenever I meet people from Australia, Scotland, Ireland, any other English-speaking country, or for that matter, India, they don't have any trouble understanding me for the most part. But I would actually find it almost very difficult, sometimes almost impossible, to understand my Scottish friends when they're talking to each other. When they would address me, they would temper down their pronunciation, whatever, because they realized that they're speaking to a foreigner, right? But the reverse never happened. I never had to change my language to make it intelligible to them. So you can, because of the influence of Hollywood, not just Hollywood, there's the music, sitcoms, everything, right? So you can rest assured that if you go to Australia or South Africa, you don't need to change your accent, but they will probably try to accommodate you. So the same thing happened over there, the Quran.
So in that time, I guess, like when we talk about formalized classical Arabic and the people who were formalizing it, the great linguists of the time, you have Sibawayh, you have so many others. So as they were going through this process, I guess what kind of selective bias would they have? Like because their goal is not to preserve every dialectic feature of the Arabic language that existed in that ecosystem, right? Their goal is to preserve what is, because the only reason why Arabic even needs to be anchored or frozen is to understand the Quran and the Hadith. This was the interest, the reason, the driving force for the Muslim linguists, right? So because of that, they would have naturally inclined towards preserving those portions of Arabic or those dialects specifically that are needed to understand the Quran, to understand the Hadith, to understand even, yeah. Would you agree with this, basically?
I would agree with it for the most part, but I would absolutely, a Muslim grammarian, and the grammarians were Muslim, would have had as his top priority the preservation of the meaning of the Quran. In other words, how did the immediate audience of the Quran, the native speakers of that time, understand the Quran? What and definitely there were differences of opinion amongst native speakers. Just because you have two native speakers listening to the same thing doesn't mean they will arrive at the same conclusion. Having said that, it is not true that that was their only motivation, or let me put it this way, there were at least some grammarians who also had as a second priority preserving all forms of Arabic. Why would they want to do that? Maybe just because they felt it was worth preserving. Maybe they felt because it might come in handy someday, or because they wanted to preserve the classical poetry, because the classical poetry was before the Quran, and therefore you cannot expect a poet from tribe X to write in the dialect of tribe Y unless he's trying to woo a woman from that tribe, right? But for the most part, they're going to write in their own dialect, or otherwise they would be probably shunned by their own tribe. If somebody's trying to go out of his way to speak in the dialect of another people, then his own tribe would probably say, "Why you think we're inferior? Like, why didn't you just leave us and go there?" So, but of course, that just begs the question of why anybody would want to preserve the meaning of that poetry in the first place. Maybe because they felt that if we understand, because there's an overlap in vocabulary between the Quran and poetry, and of course, hadith, and therefore, how poet X, Y, or Z used a certain word in his poem can shed light on what that word meant in the Quran. And you might say, well, that's fine, but why would a person want to preserve non Quranic features of Arabic? Well, because in order to understand the poem as a whole, you have to also understand the non Qurayshi features, because the Quran was in dialect of the Quraysh, that you have to know the entire dialect to be able to understand what this specific word means, right? I'll give you an example. In the very famous Arabic primer, Hidayatul Nahr, which is a simplified form of Al-Kafiya, we find that the author says, Dhu has a secondary meaning only in the dialect. Well, he didn't say only, but he says in the dialect of Banu Tayyi, fi lugati Bani Tayyi, right? But he preserves that. So that's one example.
I understand, like, for example, with the to preserve the meaning of the Quran, to preserve the meaning of the Hadith corpus, and they would have had to preserve like the entire dialects that it intersects with, right? But what about, my question is more about the other dialects that um, didn't have much to do with the because the Quranic language, as we know, between the qira'at, there is an intersection between the qira'at of the Quran, the various recitations of the Quran and modes of recitation, and different dialects, right? But there probably were dialects that were that it was not, there's no recitation of the Quran in such and such dialect, for example. And I think there were even, I was reading that there were certain dialects that were like, for example, it could cause danger. Like, for example, changing qaf to jim. I think it's called jamjama. So if you say, even though this could have been a Fusha dialectic feature or a classical feature, but imagine what it could do to the meaning and the confusion that it could cause, with qalil being jalil, for example, right? Or many such examples. So um, do you think like certain, I guess, certain dialects which were maybe like which were classical but were very far away could have been ignored just because of the lack of intersection with this corpus and its for like dialects?
It is certainly possible, but I would be inclined to think that these grammarians would have wanted to preserve everything they came across. Maybe it is due to lack of opportunity
Lack of no.
and the paucity of the speakers as well, because some tribes could be small, some could be big. Even nowadays, we are losing languages constantly, and there are languages out there that have like maybe there's like a few elderly speakers and none of their grandkids speak the language. So at that time it probably wouldn't have been the same way, but it could have been difficult for the grammarian to even discover to be aware of the existence of a certain dialect. But if they came across a dialect, chances are they would have wanted to preserve it just for the heck of just wanting to preserve it, just for the sake love of knowledge.
Because the grammarian, his job was just like, he's anything he touches which is Arabic, he
Yeah,
wants to preserve.
yeah,
He doesn't know in the future who might need this particular thing.
yeah,
So he's just trying to create the tool set for anybody in the future.
exactly.
But
The raw material.
the raw material.
Yeah,
And anybody, and if there's something that wasn't preserved, it wouldn't have been because of his active bias. It would have been something in the environment, right? Like something structurally that will, that could have been a limitation or something. So that's very interesting. Now, when it comes to, I guess we can shift to modern standard Arabic. Like we've kind of covered classical Arabic, and we've spoken many times on, modern standard Arabic and classical Arabic. So what is the danger? Why do we need to separate out classical Arabic and modern standard Arabic for both parties? One is you have like Islamic scholars, right, who are interested in this difference. And then on the other hand, you may have somebody who doesn't really care much for Islamic scholarship, but he's interested in learning Arabic, modern standard Arabic. To whom does it matter, and why should the difference between classical Arabic and modern standard Arabic matter? And I say this because most people, they just think it's Fusha, and it's just one of the same thing.
you're absolutely right that people are like when I was 16, not only unaware of the synchronic differences, but even the diachronic differences, right? They think MSA and CA are the same thing. Before I answer your question, I'll say one thing as like kind of like a preface. People have asked me, my students have asked me if Al-Fusha, which is the umbrella term for CA and MSA, Classical Arabic and Modern Standard Arabic, is a dead language. So I say no, it's a living language. How can I say that? Because a little while ago I just said that Arab kids grow up speaking a dialect.
Yes.
And that dialect varies from country to country, city to city, village to village. And rest assured, no village, no country, no town has Al-Fusha, be it MSA or CA, as its native dialect. No. There might be a few scholars who insist on speaking Al-Fusha at home, but then again, there are also a few people who speak Latin at home and ancient Greek at home and even Sanskrit at home. That doesn't make it a living language. Okay.
So you're saying Fusha is a living language?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I see yes. So then why do I not classify Al-Fusha along with Sanskrit, ancient Greek, and Latin? Because I pretty much admitted that these three, Sanskrit, ancient Greek, and Latin, and many others as well, but most people are aware, most of our audience at least, will be aware of Latin and ancient Greek, and maybe Sanskrit as well. They're classical languages of the Roman Empire, the Greeks, and India, respectively. Although the South Indians would object very vociferously to what I just said. South Indians wouldn't, and it's true that, but that's a separate podcast, hopefully. So what I did for my students was actually I drew, the following day I came back to class and I had a 2x2 table for them. And it was divided in the following way: dead, living; natural, learned. And I said, okay, what is a natural language? A natural language is a language that children acquire automatically, intuitively from their parents, siblings, friends, relatives, everybody they encounter in real life. Okay, I said real life, I'm not talking about TV. Although TV also plays a role, but I'm talking mainly about people they encounter in real life. A language that is learned in this way by a child is called a natural language, and it goes without saying that all natural languages are living languages. It's impossible for a language to be natural but not living. I mean, that's logically impossible. What is the reverse possible? Yes. A living language doesn't have to be a natural language. But before I get into that, one more thing. What is a learned language? What is the opposite of a natural language? The opposite of a living language is a dead language. What is the opposite of a natural language? A learned language. A learned language is a language which...
So you have living and dead, right?
Mhm.
Then you have learned and natural. So can a dead language be learned and natural? Or it cannot be natural, but can it be learned?
Yes.
Okay.
What's the opposite? I just defined what natural is. What's the opposite of natural? Learned. A learned language is a language which is learned. Where is it learned? It is not learned when your mother is talking to you, asking you to go to the bathroom, asking you to make your bed, take out the trash, do the chores, stop annoying your brother, call your dad, tell your dad that dinner's ready, and turn the TV down. You know, I'm trying to get some work. I'm trying to do some work. A learned language is a language that you don't learn that way. It's a language which you learn at a seminary, college, university, but not from your mom, dad, etc., etc. Yeah, through study. You are taught it. You are taught it.
So you have a language you learn through formal study, and you have a language which you acquire naturally growing up.
Yeah. So in my case, and I think in your case as well, in my case, I had two natural languages. I was born in America. We grew up speaking English. To this day, my siblings and I communicate in English. Of course, we might throw in an Urdu word here and there, especially if there's no real English equivalent for it, the biryani or the pulao. But even sometimes there is an English word for it. We might say yar. So sometimes, but those are like just like sporadic words here and there. Other than that, no, it's English. But because our parents spoke Urdu as well, not to us. Well, our mother spoke Urdu to us sometimes, 50% English, 50% Urdu. Our dad spoke only English because he grew up speaking English because he was raised in Wales in the UK. So my father was a native speaker of English in a sense. He spoke English as his first language and Urdu as second language. So we grew up speaking two natural languages. And in your case, I think it's English, Urdu, and Kashmiri. You have three natural languages, yeah. And I've had friends like that as well who spoke English, Urdu, and Pashto, or English, Urdu, and Sindhi, etc.
So if we took Hebrew as a case study, right? It's a dead language, right? But then it was like there are people who grow up learning it as a natural language now because it has been brought alive through study.
Yes, yes.
Almost like forcibly so.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
I can talk more about Hebrew if you give me 5 minutes to just finish this, because Hebrew is such a special case, and we can learn so much from it. I've learned much from it, and I've actually. Anyway, I'll get to that. I don't want to jump the gun.
I don't want to spend too much time on these case studies.
Yeah,
But
we can spend a few minutes on Hebrew, simply because although we can't help but admire how they made a living language, a dead language living again, but we can learn quite a few things from that case study. It's a very instructive case study on what to do and what not to do. So a learned language is what I just told you, is acquired through formal study. And people can easily grow up speaking 2, 3, maybe even more natural languages. Usually not more than 3. That's kind of rare, but 2 and 3 is very common in Pakistan and India. Now, what's the difference between a living language and a dead language? A dead language, well, Latin, Sanskrit, and ancient Greek are dead languages. You might argue, well, aren't they learned? For sure, they're not natural. They're not natural languages, but so they're learned languages. So the fact that they are taught, doesn't that prove that they are living? They might be learned, but they're not dead. They're learned and they're living. No. So they're dead because nobody uses them to actually communicate, and no new knowledge, or let me put it this way, nobody uses Latin, ancient Greek, or Sanskrit. Of course, there are always exceptions, but for the most part, 99% of those who know these languages do not use them to formulate and express their thoughts. Now think about it. I know people whose mother tongue is Pashto, but they will formulate their thoughts in Urdu. Why? For the simple reason that they want to maximize their audience. If you speak Pashto, you're going to be able to communicate with 15% of the population of Pakistan. If you speak Urdu, you can communicate 100%. Why would you want to restrict your message to 15%? Unless, of course, you don't want the other 85% to understand.
Or you want the intimacy
that's true. That's true, because if you're that's true. That's true also. That's all. But for the most part, I've seen people whose mother tongue is Punjabi, Pashto, Sindhi, whatever. They do not. This is important. They do not first formulate their thoughts in Pashto, Punjabi, Sindhi, whatever, and then proceed to translate into Urdu. They directly formulate their thoughts in Urdu. How can they do that? Because Urdu is almost as much a natural language as their home languages, right? Because they grew up hearing Urdu. They might not speak Urdu at home, but they speak Urdu as well, or almost as well as other people. So now think about it. So this proves that just because you speak one language at home doesn't mean that you always formulate and express your thoughts in that same language. No, you can formulate and express your thoughts in another language without translating from this tongue into this tongue. No, directly into Urdu. Similarly, I've seen Pakistani scholars formulate their thoughts in Arabic. Okay, admittedly, beginners can't do that. They have to think in Urdu and then translate into Arabic. But once you get a certain point, me and my friends would have spontaneous conversations in Arabic. I know for a fact that I was not thinking in Urdu or English, or actually English in my case. My native language is English, I would say. I think in English. So, okay, now getting back to the point. So not only are there very few people who have learned Latin, ancient Greek, and Sanskrit, even those who have do not use these languages for the formulation and expression of their thoughts, and 2, for communication with other people, okay? As opposed to, once again, India, Pakistan, these are very good examples, because you will find a North Indian who speaks Marathi speaking to a South Indian who speaks Telugu in Hindi. Yeah. Because he doesn't know Marathi and she doesn't know Telugu. They have no choice but to speak Hindi, even though they might not like it. Okay, so Hindi. Well, Hindi is a living language anyway. But even aside, ignoring the fact that there are hundreds of millions of people who speak Hindi, aside from that, even if all of them died, Hindi would still be a living language. Why? Because it's useful as a link language between Marathi, Gujarati, Punjabi, Bengali, Telugu, etc., 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 all these speakers, right? Now, how many people use Sanskrit, Latin, ancient Greek to communicate? You can imagine maybe just for fun, maybe sending a WhatsApp message or a text message for fun on Facebook, but that doesn't really count. Now you see the difference between a dead and living language. So living language can be a learned language, because if the learned language, which is not the home language by definition, the learned language by definition is not the home language, not the mother tongue, but Arabs do formulate and express their ideas in Al-Fusha, and number two, they use it to communicate. I just told you about my Egyptian friend and his Moroccan friends, and this story is repeated again and again and again because they cannot communicate otherwise. They have no choice. It's the lingua franca. What Mandarin is to China, what Hindi is to India, Al-Fusha is to the Arab world.
Can any dead language be brought to life?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but I just want to say that pretty much convinced my students that Arabic is not an Al-Fusha. Sorry, Al-Fusha might not be a natural language. It's pretty much not, for the 99% of the time, it's a learned language. I would say 99.9% of the time, actually. We even add a few more lines, actually. It's a learned language, but nonetheless, it is a fully living language, which you cannot say for these other languages. Yes, coming to your question, what is your question again?
Yeah, so if we compare, like, okay, we have Hebrew. Okay, one is you can bring any dead language to life to some degree, right? But that would also depend on the corpus that you have, because inevitably, let's say you have a corpus, that corpus, the data that you have from that can apply to maybe 5% of scenarios in the real world. And then you need enough data, you need enough grammar extracted from that data to be able to analogize and apply it to the common, to everything around us today. And if you don't have enough, then that means you cannot make it a living language, right?
You can still do
inventing. You would have to invent.
Yeah. So what happens is, because
wherever you have gaps, you'd have to like fill in the gaps.
You have a background in mathematics, and my master's was in Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Chicago, but my undergrad was in mathematics with a minor in computer science. And your background is not very different. It's what's your bachelor's in?
Yeah, computer science.
Computer science, software engineering. But we are both math people, right? What happens is that with any corpus, especially small corpuses, corpora, the grammar is underdetermined by the data, because think about it, when you have points on a graph, you can fit multiple curves through that graph. So how do you extrapolate from it? So as rational human beings, we would go with the simpler curve. And that curve can then be disproved by more data coming in. The grammarians combed vast amounts of data for Arabic, Sanskrit, you name it, any of these languages, and they constructed formula. Formula, you could say. Rules, they extrapolated rules. And where there was a paucity of data, you can imagine that grammarian A said the curve is linear. Another grammarian said, no, because we have this point over here, it's a parabola. And I said, no, it's actually it's a quadratic. It's whatever, this kind of quadratic equation. Quadratic equation is a parabola, and I'm forgetting my terminology because I'm completely out. You forget the terms. With mathematics, I've forgotten the terms, the labels. With Arabic grammar, also I've forgotten the labels because you don't use the labels when you remember the concepts. So you have the whatever. Now I'm forgetting the terms. It's embarrassing, but that my bachelor's in mathematics. So you can fit multiple curves through it, right? And when you have a very large amount of points, then it's very difficult to fit more than one curve because you have okay, so it's exactly a parabola, right? Like that. Or
so
this
less data points leaves more room for
interpretation, exactly. And that's why we have Kufis and Basris and with dead languages, because with I should say with natural languages, you can always do the following. You have a corpus and you find a gap. You and I, let's say we have a debate about whether this French textbook says you should use this and this is, but what about this case? And you say, that's true. It doesn't mention this case. What do? Call up our French friends and ask them, right?
Yeah.
Ask them, which of these two sentences is correct? Are they both correct? Okay. But with learned languages, you can't do that because the native speakers no longer exist. So with living languages, you can do that. Any gap can be filled in. Just takes one phone call, one text message on WhatsApp, and that's it.
So languages that have been brought alive, that's also a continuum based on the data set that they have, right? The amount of literary data that they have.
Yeah.
So that means that okay, now if we compare, we got the idea that any dead language can theoretically be brought to life, but if the corpus of that language is very small, then there could be like 100 ways to bring it to life, right? Basically. But if that data is like very dense, then it would be very difficult. It would be like 1, 2, or like it would be much less,
Very little variation.
very little variation,
Yeah.
right? Based on that formalization. So now if we compare, for example, if we compare like Arabic, right? Like we're talking about modern standard Arabic, let's say, is this a living language? So if we compare that to like, let's say Hebrew, so you're classifying both of these as number one. You're saying, are you okay? Hebrew, you're saying you're admitting it was a dead language, and then it was brought to life. So are you saying that Arabic was also like, because there seems to be an important difference here in the sense that you have a living chain of, um, yeah, like you have a living chain. Like there was never a point where there was a break in classical Arabic, whereas in modern, or sorry, in modern standard Arabic, whereas
Al-Fusha, yeah.
Al-Fusha, right?
Unbroken chain.
Unbroken chain. So in a way, modern standard Arabic is related to classical Arabic, like quite literally. Like, but for Hebrew, no, there was a huge gap, right? So would you like? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off with an
And
anecdote.
you know Hebrew.
Oh, yes,
You
yes.
know Hebrew.
Yes, and I know several Semitic languages. That was my focus at the University of Chicago. I'll start with an anecdote from many years ago. I had a friend, and he lived in Pakistan. He was married to a Pakistani girl, but he himself was a convert. He was what you call a white Anglo-Saxon convert to Islam, American. Of course, he knew Urdu. He lived in Pakistan, but he was a strong, and he studied in Pakistan. He studied in Urdu, of course, because the seminaries over there are in Urdu. But he felt very strongly that Urdu should be gradually phased out in favor of Arabic in our seminaries at least. And I was sitting in the audience. It was a small audience. He wasn't giving this talk at some seminary. It was a very small audience of maybe 24 people at a school. Actually, at a school. Never mind, it's not relevant. So he said we should try to bring back, or we should bring Arabic to life. And he said, and by the way, I should also mention at this point that one of his parents was Jewish. In fact, I think maybe both of his parents were Jewish. So he's ethnically actually Jewish. That's maybe why he knew that the Zionists did manage to successfully bring Hebrew back to life, because he quoted the Zionist experiment as a success story, which it is. He said, if the Zionists were able to bring back Hebrew to life in Palestine, then why can't we bring Arabic to life? And I sat there and, I just shook my head. I said, the Zionists could do it, we can't. And I'm sure quite a few people, including him, were surprised. And I said, allow me to explain. In 1948, and before 1948 as well, there were several waves of Jews moving to Palestine, to occupy it, of course, over the decades during the British Mandate. And these people spoke very different languages. Now, I'm not here to talk about the history of Zionism or the foundation of the state of Israel and Palestine, etc. I'm here to talk about the linguistic aspect purely. And the Zionists, of course, did not know. They knew one thing, that once they have taken over Palestine, they will need a language. That's fairly obvious. And I remember back in the day, when I was a teenager, I was reading, I think, Golda Meir's autobiography. I read actually quite a few books by or about the Zionist leaders. I find it very fascinating. and Golda Meir was the prime minister of Israel at one point in time. So she wrote, and this is like from literally 30 years ago, she wrote, if I'm not mistaken, that she said, quote unquote, we cannot imagine an Israel without Yiddish. Yiddish was the natural language of much of European Jewry, Ashkenazi Jewry. Russian Jews, German Jews, French Jews, they spoke Yiddish, which was basically what is, of course, this is, I don't want to go in detail about this, but very simplistically, Yiddish was a German dialect written in the Hebrew script. And this was their mother tongue. A good parallel is Urdu amongst Desis. Desis consider Arabic, Muslim Desis consider Arabic the sacred language, but Urdu is, for many of them, maybe most of them, their national language. So getting back to Golda Meir, she said, we cannot imagine Israel without Yiddish. Of course, then World War II came along and the Holocaust came along, and now you can imagine after Hitler, after the Holocaust, there is no way on earth that the Zionists are going to have a form of German as the national language of Israel. That's ridiculous, right? Yeah. So that went out the window. With that out of the way, what was going to be the national language of the future Zionist state? And it's a no-brainer, because you have Jews who are speaking Russian, Spanish, French, Arabic. In fact, at one point in time, the vast majority of Jews lived in Arab countries, or at least Muslim countries. There were Jews who speak Turkish, Persian, you name it, and they don't have a common language. So it is a no-brainer that if you're going to teach them all one language, that can be the lowest common denominator, the one language, the linked language. Russian Jews will speak Russian at home. Arab Jews will speak Arabic at home. But the link language between your Russian neighbor and yourself is going to be Hebrew. And it worked like a charm. It worked very well because necessity is the mother of invention. And these people had no choice but to speak whatever broken Hebrew they knew, because you're going to the grocery store and you want to buy eggs, and the person over there happens to be an immigrant from Russia, and you happen to be an immigrant from Germany. You have no choice but to speak broken, childish Hebrew. That's why the Zionists were extremely successful at bringing Hebrew back to life. So much so that my very first Hebrew teacher was, to cut a long story short, his grandparents spoke Yiddish. I think his parents knew some Yiddish, but they basically spoke Hebrew. And my friend, the new generation, spoke basically only Hebrew, and they knew maybe a smattering of Yiddish, maybe a few Yiddish phrases. So it is phased out. First generation, Yiddish, and they know enough Hebrew to get by, but that's about it, right? Second generation, bilingual. Third generation, mostly Hebrew, a little bit of Russian / Yiddish / whatever the language is, right? So I told those people in Pakistan and Karachi that you can't replicate this experiment in Pakistan for this, and people have tried, for the simple reason that here we already have a linked language. And time and again, I have seen a Pashto speaker speaking to a Punjabi speaker, and they try to speak Arabic, and after a few minutes, they're like, forget it, let's just speak Urdu. Because they have a linked language. You would have to eradicate Urdu to allow Arabic to fill in the gap. So long as Sindhi speakers, Balochi speakers, Punjabi speakers, Pashto speakers, Kashmiri speakers, etc., have a linked language to fall back on, they have very little incentive to learn Arabic.
Unless there was a state which had all elements, like you had these and then you had Arabs as well, then actually modern standard Arabic could be the...
That is true, but it requires a certain critical mass. So at Jami Dar al Ulum Karachi, I saw to my dismay that foreigners from Tajikistan, from Turkey, from Iran, not all of them, but I would say many, in fact, probably most of them, they learned Urdu extremely well. Why? Because because you're totally immersed in Urdu. I mean, and it's not just that. I mean, this is another topic, of course, but I mean, the amount learning Urdu is so useful if you want to learn Arabic, because the amount of Arabic textbooks in Urdu, the amount of Urdu commentaries on Arabic books is staggering. In fact, I tell my students again and again that it is so much easier for me to teach Arabic books because I know Urdu, because I can simply draw on Urdu commentaries for Arabic works. So those people also realized if you want to access the vast amount of Urdu commentary literature on Arabic texts, you got to learn Urdu.
So in summary, your those students, they were asking about if it's possible to make Arabic a living language in Pakistan, in the subcontinent. But if we look at the Arabian Peninsula and North Africa, then in a way it is already a living language there because they already have that kind of
Yeah.
incentive and so on and so forth.
In India, it is actually possible because in India, as you may know, because you're also of Indian origin,
There are many people who don't speak Urdu.
Hindi, absolutely. And the south of India in particular is actually quite anti-Hindi.
Yeah.
And I remember my shock when this happened to me more than once. I started to speak Hindi to an Indian, and he or she was like, I don't know Hindi. And I was taken aback. And that person said, I'm South India. I know two languages, Tamil and English. And then I thought, okay, well, at least Muslims know Urdu/Hindi. And then to my shock, I had a student in Los Angeles, and I, for the longest time, I thought that she understood Urdu, and she said, I don't know any Urdu. I know English and Tamil. And she was Muslim. So it is not true that all Muslim Indians know Urdu and all other Indians know Hindi. So actually in India, it is possible to make Arabic a linked language, but it requires a huge amount of effort. In Pakistan, it's impossible pretty much.
So now I want to come back to our question. What are the differences between classical Arabic and modern standard Arabic? And why is this even important, right? Like they're so close, and why should we even care about those differences? What are the harms if we don't know the differences? Are there any harms? And then when we get into it, what are the categories of differences between classical Arabic and modern standard Arabic?
I'll start off with a case study to highlight the importance of knowing the differences between two forms of the language, of a language that are similar. An American was trying to learn German, and he wanted to go to Germany. He was also aware of the fact that standard German, which is taught in schools, which all educated Germans know, and which is the form of the language taught to foreigners, is largely an artificial creation. It's not that they took one dialect and said, from now on, this is going to be the standard form of German that all Germans will use. No, it's basically an artificial creation. He knew that. So his question to a native speaker was, in what part of Germany is the local colloquial dialect the closest to standard German? So a native speaker answered this question. She said, the straight answer to your question is, Berlin is the part of Germany where the local colloquial dialect, the vernacular, is the closest standard German. And what
Sense, and this is to draw a parallel. When people are learning Arabic, they ask all the time which place has the Arabic which is closest to Fusha.
Exactly. I've been asked that as well.
Yeah.
Because students are generally aware that Arabs do not speak Fusha. So the question is, where is the language the least corrupted, the least divergent?
And the idea is, if I go there, then that's the best place.
That's the best place. Exactly. So she went on to say, having said that, you should go to South Germany to practice your standard German.
Wow.
Because in South Germany, the local dialects, and there are many dialects, are highly divergent from standard German. Now, I'm sure he was shocked because I was shocked when I was reading this whole exchange on some forum on the internet. Why would she say that? That doesn't make any sense. It's almost as if she's contradicting herself, right? She explained because she knew what that person must have been thinking. She said, allow me to explain. If you go to Berlin and start speaking standard German, people will know you're a foreigner, of course, and therefore they will immediately switch from the vernacular to standard German. And after a little while, they will veer off into the dialect precisely because the dialect is so similar to standard German that it's difficult for the native speakers to distinguish them, to keep them apart in their minds, because they're very similar. So they'll start off in standard German because they know that the person's a foreigner, but they will quickly veer off. It depends on the level of education also, but eventually they will veer off into the dialect. South Germany, they're not going to do that because in South Germany, the local dialect is so different, so divergent that it's almost separate language. South Germans almost learn it like a separate language, the standard German. So they will switch to standard German when speaking to a foreigner, or not necessarily a foreigner. It could be a person from North Germany, a person from Switzerland, from Austria, and they will start off in standard German and they will stick to it because they cannot veer off into something that is almost a different language.
Yeah.
It is ironic. It is precisely because Standard German and the Berlin dialect are so similar that the mixing takes place. But the German spoken in South Germany is so divergent.
And this is what you call in our false friends, right? Can you talk about this concept?
Absolutely. So yeah, that was a case study. Back to Arabic, what happens is that classical Arabic and MSA, CA and MSA, are very similar. So that is precisely where the danger lies, as opposed to in stark contrast to the dialects, because most students and just about all Arabs in the 21st century, I would say all Arabs know this, that the dialects are very different from Al-Fusha. So because they're aware of those differences, for the most part, although even over there, I will say a bit later on, but for the most part, there's no danger, maybe a little bit, but I'll talk about that later. The real danger is precisely where people are not aware of the differences. That is always where the danger lies.
To the extent that even the term is just al-fusha, a blanket term.
Actually, what you just brought up proves my point, basically. The fact that in the Arabic language, they don't actually have a separate term, a separate designation, a separate label for the Arabic spoken at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, a little bit before him, a little bit after him, and a separate term for the Arabic used in Al Jazeera, Al Haya, the newspaper, Al Ahram, etc., by educated Arabs of the 21st century. The fact that they don't have separate labels proves my point. From their perspective, is as Al-Fusha. That's a uniform, monolithic language.
One question here is, going back to the two categories that I split even classical Arabic to, which was like the classical Arabic ecosystem, which is everything that was
synchronic,
synchronic, like you exactly, and then the formalized classical Arabic. So when, and I don't want to really detract from the point here, but when classical Arabic, because you mentioned that the difference between the way modern standard Arabic is spoken today versus the way it was spoken at the time of the Prophet. So now when we say, okay, the way the language was spoken at the time of the Prophet, is that closer to the classical Arabic ecosystem or formalized classical Arabic? And when we say formalized classical Arabic, because this was something mudawwan, right? It was something put together, and it's a set of rules that we're referring to. Was there ever a one-to-one mapping between what was spoken in any tribe, one-to-one exactly with formalized classical Arabic? Does that make sense?
The thing is that even with formalized classical Arabic, you had different options, and I mentioned this before as well. The said dhu. But having said that, the very fact that the author of Hidayat al-Nahw, and probably other books as well, Hidayat al-Nahw is a simplified version of the very fact that he went out of his way to say means that he felt the need to tell the student, this is not standard classical Arabic that you'll find in the Hadith or in the Quran.
But it is a form of classical.
Yeah, because it's synchronic. It's part of the snapshot. It's part of that still frame when you pause the video in 680, more or less.
So coming back to this point that you were saying, continue with.
Right. So the differences. So once again, when two things are similar, that's where the danger lies. And Al-Fusha is an umbrella term, which is kind of dangerous, right? You can have an umbrella term, but then you also have to have more finer gradations. And in English, we have that. Classical Arabic, modern standard Arabic. Now, for example, so the broad categories of differences, there are several categories, but I'll just name 5 of them. And morphological, relating to sarf, syntactic, relating to nahu. Then there's individual words, which I can give quite a few examples of, and I will, inshallah. And aside from that, there's the pronunciation itself, what we call phonology or tajweed in Arabic, and expressions, you can say expressions, like set expressions. So for example, many years ago, back when I was naive, I found an Arab in my neighborhood, and I started studying Arabic with them, and he had some experience teaching Arabic. But then again, having experience teaching a subject privately, there's no quality control. So anybody can say, I've been teaching mathematics for 20 years. Yeah, but where?
Yeah.
At University of Chicago? Okay, that's impressive. On your own, well, all that proves is that your students thought you were good. That doesn't really prove much, right? So he said, istaqarrayna. So is to settle. So he said, I can't remember the exact context, but he was actually married to a Pakistani girl. So he might have been saying, we've settled over here a long time ago, but he's istaqarrayna. So that set off alarm bells in my mind. But of course, I was not in a position to say anything. I went home and checked my grammar book, and then I thought, okay, this would have been istaqarrarna. Why would it say istaqarrayna? And after a while, we realized, okay, because superficially it's like, so qarra and salla. So you say sallaytu, I prayed, but qarartu. So you can see how they're similar. They sound a bit similar. Just the vowel length is salla, qarra, farra, marra. And I bet you that he would probably have said, I fled, farraitu.
Yeah.
Okay. I stretched, maddaitu. So there's a morphological difference. Other difference.
This exists, exactly. That's true. It exists in the and then it's like
It
brought into
it infiltrates. Yeah, exactly.
But that could be, it could easily be said that that was a case of a person who is not very good at even modern standard Arabic, and he's letting his colloquial sneak in. But if someone is educated in modern standard Arabic, then it's not as, like, we're talking about people. We don't want to talk about people who are like, letting things from their colloquial creep in, but people who are actually educated in modern standard Arabic.
Right.
So what are the dangers that someone educated and speaking correctly in accordance with modern standard Arabic is making?
Yes.
Right? Or not the mistakes, because according to MSA it may be correct.
Absolutely.
But in contrast to CA, like if this person, let's say you grow up and you're only educated with Al Jazeera Arabic, right? And then you open Quran and Hadith.
Absolutely.
Right, like this is the litmus test, basically. That what would be the things, what would be the categories of things that just stand out as strange to you, right? That's pretty much what we're saying, and vice versa as well. Like a Bedouin or someone living in 14 centuries ago, if he came and he started listening to Al Jazeera minus all the modern things, let's say all the modern words and everything, what would be the things that would be strange or something, let's say? So what are those? So you mentioned the categories. So I also like put a list of categories together, and I just wanted to maybe read them out and maybe get your thoughts on on my list as well. And obviously you can have different taxonomies. So these are the the kinds of differences that I put together as I was preparing. So number one, you have, like you mentioned, you have you may have like sounds that are different, but like when we just strictly talk like other than sounds, you have old words, let's say words that existed at that time, but now they have been given additional meaning, right? This is one category. So words that existed, but now they've been given additional meaning, whether correctly or incorrectly, because we know that Arabic, كل ما قيس من العربية فهو من العربية. Everything which is analogized from the Arabic language using those formalized rules, if it's done correctly, then it is still considered classical Arabic, right? It's still considered an extension of that same language. But it's also possible for someone to do it incorrectly, right? So that's category number one, old words that have new added meanings, right?
Repurposed.
Repurposed meanings. Number two is new words and new roots. Like you have totally new coinage, right? A completely new word that just didn't exist, whether it's derived from an existing root or whether a new root completely has come about. Number three, imagine this, like you have, let's say you have 3-4 words that had the same meaning, and it's a whole nother discussion. Do synonyms exist or don't they exist? But let's say you have 3-4 words for I like or anything, I see. And let's say the balance shifts over time. So at that time you had one word that was dominant for a particular tasawwur or for a particular conception, for a meaning that you're trying to convey. But then the balance shifts in favor of another synonym, right? So this is actually also a theoretical change that could take place in the language as well, right? Now, number 4 is old phrases that lost, that now are no longer used, right? They're, for example, Allah.
I like that. I like the last one.
Or, la aba lak, like these kinds of things. So, okay, right. So, all these kinds of things are like, they were used very commonly, right? They were like part of their everyday speech. And now if you say them to someone, then they're just going to be weird, right?
Yeah. You could get like, beaten up for that probably.
There you go. So old phrases that don't have their meanings anymore, or that are not used anymore. And then sentence and like grammar habits, like, and sarfi and syntactical structural changes to the language, right? So that's number 5. And number 6 is like foreign expressions that are entered into Arabic, like idioms and sayings, like something which is, let's say, literally translated.
Yes, loan
Which
translation.
it wouldn't be like it wouldn't be like a natural formage or formation, but now it's like it's just translated word by word. So what do you think about? Do you think like this is a good list of categories?
Absolutely. I'll say one thing right from the get-go. You hit the nail on the head when you said that that teacher of mine, that's not a very good example, but it's not a very bad example either, because it is true that that's an example of the effect of the dialect on on modern standard Arabic, and he was trying to speak modern standard Arabic. Let me put it this way: you hit the nail on the head, because a per what he said was incorrect even by the standards of MSA. No MSA textbook would sanction what he said.
Exactly.
And a highly educated speaker of MSA, an Al Jazeera journalist. So what is far more consequential is what even the editor of Al Ahram, even the whatever, a reporter for Al Jazeera, would not notice, simply because in MSA that's acceptable. That is correct in MSA. That is perfectly correct, right? So over there we have, for example, you talked about words whose meanings have changed.
Yeah. So let's talk about category number one.
Mhm.
Old words that now, words that existed, but now they have added meaning,
Repurpose,
changed
yeah.
meaning. So let's
Yeah.
talk about this.
Yes, I would say this is probably the least problematic, because when you take a word and you repurpose it, the context of its use is going to be so different from that of 40 centuries ago, that there's no way anybody in his mind, in his or her mind, would open up classical poetry and say, oh yes, the word hatif. Hatif, what is it from? It's from the root hat, and it means an invisible voice. So hatif literally means an invisible caller, an invisible voice. Nobody in his right mind would say, okay, and of course in MSA we know it means a phone, which makes sense because it's an invisible voice. So I would say that's a pretty good pretty good qiyas, a pretty good way of drawing on classical sources to form a new word. Excellent. Is there any danger over here? No, because if you came across the verb hatafa, or a noun derived from it, like hatif or whatever, you would know that there's no way such and such person 40 centuries ago was talking about a phone. Okay? Saruch. Saruch is a missile. It comes from a classical root. Once again, if somebody came across this word in classical Arabic, actually, I don't even know if this precise word exists, but even if it does, nobody would think that a missile is being talked about, intercontinental ballistic missile, 40 centuries ago, right?
Exactly.
So because the context is so different, there's no danger. The danger is precisely when the contexts of use of the two words are similar. And I don't think that's going to happen when there is a deliberate assignment of a new meaning to an old word. Deliberate, I'm emphasizing deliberate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But if it gradually drifts,
Yeah.
that's totally
And
different.
also like another point worth mentioning here is how are words coined in modern standard Arabic? They're actually institutions
Mhm.
that they have a whole workflow and a process, and it's pretty amazing actually. I was
Mhm.
doing some research on it. So you have like you have an institute in Egypt, and I have the list written down. You have Maracas, and you have institutions in different countries. But what they'll do is they will think, okay, for this particular, for example, let's say, and why is this so needed? Because even they have, let's say they're teaching biology in Arabic, like in
Mhm.
Syria, or they're teaching whatever. So there needs to be a process to formalize words. So they'll recommend words. They'll actually recommend words, and they will test it. They have a whole, like they have a board, whatever, and then they discuss it amongst themselves. They debate it, and then they actually put it out for a year. They see how it's accepted, and then they actually reconsider again. So there's a very serious kind of process that these institutions use to recommend and add words. And then only at the end of that process is that word actually added to the dictionary.
Mhm.
So I found
Yeah.
that pretty fascinating.
Mhm. I did too. And many years ago, I read up on this, and somebody wrote I think maybe it's in the preface to the Hans Word Dictionary, which is pretty much the standard dictionary for MSA, originally from in German, of course. I think it was in that dictionary that it said in the preface, the issue is not so much in coining new words as it is in ensuring that people actually use them. So to get people to, you can invent all the words you want, but I think what
People
Hans,
have to use
yeah,
them.
people are, yeah. So for example, computer hasub. How many Arabs actually use the word hasub?
Yeah.
And normally, okay. And hatif. How many people actually use the word hatif? I remember my shock when I saw an Arab saying, telefoniyan. Okay, so he'd used correct MSA/classical Arabic grammar and put telefoniyan in it, right?
Yeah.
So, and I said, show me Hatifian. He said, okay, fine, Hatifian.
Yeah.
But it is clear that he would not normally say that. I'm making him do it. Midya, radio. I have never come across midya used in MSA in my life. I know it exists, but nobody say radio. Similarly, television, whatever. To televise is clearly from French, right? So actually, people once again, there. Yeah, I think mirya is the proposed word for mir. I can't even remember. But people propose words for television, whatever, etc. But who's going to use them? Who's going to make sure people use them?
Yeah. These are new, exactly.
Yeah, and I remember in my Hindi textbook also it said the same thing. It said, so yes, the purists have made a word for telephone. What is it? Television, doordarshan. But Hindi speakers have no problem with saying telephone, television, train instead of lo pat gamani.
Yeah.
Maybe some Hindu nationalists, some Hindi purists would say it. 99.9% Hindi speakers say telephone, television, train,
Exactly.
station, etc.
Exactly.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Purists can say all they want. Who's going to listen to them?
Who's going to listen to that?
Yeah.
That's true. You said this would have the least danger, but let me maybe mention a counterexample that could have more danger, because the examples that we talked about are examples that maintain boundaries between the new meaning assigned to the old word and then the old meaning itself.
Because the context of use is widely different.
Yeah. But what about, for example, I'll give you an example. In the Quran, in the daughter of Shu'aib, alayhi salam, she says to her father, Ya abat istajih, that, oh my father, hire him, about Moses, Musa alayhi salam. So now the word istijjar was used for hiring, right? To bring him on pay, hire him. And there was no negative connotation to this.
Mhm.
However, today, if you want to hire someone and you say, okay, uridu an right?
Mhm.
This, according to my, and one thing I want to tell the viewers is that all the examples that we're mentioning, these are to some degree anecdotal and they're inductive. So if a particular anecdote or if a particular example is not correct, focus on the categories. But according to my experience, if you say to somebody, it would come across as very crude, like you're making their
Condescending.
condescending. There are connotations attached to this that were not attached here.
Mhm.
So if somebody today who only knew MSA, let's say, and he understood istijar with this kind of meaning, and then he read this ayah of the Quran, he would find it very derogatory, especially for maybe a Nabi, right? But that's not the case, right? That actually does not, maybe his senses would tell him, okay, obviously I'm wrong, it's the Quran, it wouldn't have that. But my point is, like, just on a superficial reading, that's what they would think. So, you have one kind of new meaning assigned to old words, which does not hurt the old meaning. But then this one, it actually conflicts. It actually changes. It challenges the old meaning, right? So this would be, a lot more dangerous. And then,
I can give an example from English. Yeah, because back in the day, I was taking some English course with some professor, and he said he was talking about exactly this in the English language, how over just a few decades the meaning of a word can change. And he said back in the 40s, and he was an elderly person, so he remembered those days probably. He said back in the 40s there was some radio show, and one of the people, there's a husband and wife being interviewed, and there was some celebrity couple, and one of them said on national radio, he said to his wife on national radio, or whatever on radio, he said, "Come on, baby," admitted, "nobody makes love like me." And the professor said, "Can you imagine a person saying this on the radio in the 40s?" His point was, nowadays, oh, nobody cares. Okay, the obscenity, whatever, people say obscenities on the radio and TV. Okay, this is like nothing compared to that. In the 40s, a person saying this to his wife on a radio show, it did not mean what it means now. And that also that reminded me that when I was reading the Chronicles of Narnia, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you might have heard of it. It was popular back when I was a kid, at least. And yeah, sure enough, in one of the books, I think Prince Caspian or the Silver Chair, I love that series. The Silver Chair. Yeah. So one girl, she said, it said, so she went around making love to everybody in the castle. So the meaning that the author intended, C.S. Lewis, was not what a person would take now.
Yeah.
In a kid's book, first of all, it's written like maybe a century ago, and it's a kid's book.
Yeah.
kids fiction, right? So this is a good example of that because the context.
The word gay, the marry and gay.
Yeah, yeah. Very common. When I was a kid, and there was that cartoon that I loved, the Flintstones, and it ended with, "We'll have a gay old time." Exactly. Yeah, there was a TV show called Mr. Ed, the talking horse. You probably remember that. I remember Mr. Ed, right? Mr. Ed, the talking horse, and that. To cut a long story short, somebody said, "Okay, he just got home. Let's all pretend we're gay. Let's all pretend we're gay." Yeah. It meant let's pretend we're very happy and carefree, because actually something serious had happened in the show. Let's all pretend we're gay.
Yeah. So now coming to the next category where you have new words and new roots, right? So you can well, actually there's one more. So for the word sayyara in Surah Yusuf, that Allah is saying that, okay, the sayyara came when Yusuf alayhi salam was in the well. فَأَرْسَلُوا وَارِدَهُمْ, they sent their water boy, فَأَدْلَى دَلْوَهُ, he put his bucket in. So sayyara then existed and it exists today, but it has two different meanings, but they're non-intrusive. Like sayyara that time meant a caravan of people traveling, and today it means a car, and they're both correct according to Arabic usages. Like they're both correct according to the analogy. And still today, if you go to the desert and you see a bunch of people traveling, you could still say hadith sayyara, right? So it doesn't really challenge the old meaning. But new words and new roots, like for example, you have, so sayyara, the word existed, but nadara, I don't think nadara existed before. So the root existed. Many other mushtaqat and derived forms existed, but did the word nadara exist? Maybe, I don't know, but I'm not aware of it existing. So there are many extensions that are because nadara means glasses. So it's used today. It's a correct coinage. It's a new coinage, right? And this is a natural extension of classical Arabic. So this is something which is not really a problem, but it's still something. If somebody does it incorrectly, right, then that would be a problem.
Yeah, and of course, if people invent a new word that they don't assign a new meaning to an old word like hatif, instead, or sayyara. Sayyara is a very good example. Sierra actually is also not problematic because nobody in his right mind would look at Yusuf or some hadith or poetry and say, "Oh, look at that, they had cars 40 centuries ago." Exactly. Okay, or in fact, say that in Yusuf al-Islam's case, even more, like thousands of years ago, maybe 3,000 years ago, if not more. So that's not a problem. And coining new words is also not a problem because if you have a new word, then that word will simply not exist in classical Arabic, no problem, right? Okay, Nawara won't exist, Maktaba doesn't exist, right? That's not a problem, right?
So there's no.
Now that is,
Yeah, but I'll give you one example in new coinage that is incorrect. So for example, one thing which is very common is the word mudara, which is, so for example, you have wazir, which means minister, and the plural of it is, but mudir,
it's not madir.
It's not madir, it's a different form, but it was incorrectly, there was tawahum, and then it was pluralized on the pattern of wuzara as mudara, but in reality it should be mudirun. And this is something which is very common and spread. But it's like going back to what you said earlier, you can propose a word or propose a change, but once it becomes, you have to. So this is something.
It's false analysis. It's called reanalysis. And I remember I was reading a newspaper, Al Hayah. Al Hayah is considered one of the top newspapers out there in the Arab world. You can imagine my surprise when I saw that in one article they had the plural of masir as masair with a hamza. You might say, what's wrong with that, right? After the plural of ir with a hamza. Yes, but the thing is that because the rule in al-Musigha and other books is if the waw or ya is not part of the root letters, then it changes it to hamza. But in masir, the ya is part of the root letters, it would be masayir. And that's why I've told my students in the past also, you can tell the level of such and such author, the level of his Arabic, because in the dedication of his book, he said, I dedicate my book to the mashayikh. Mashayikh is actually incorrect, should be mashayikh. Yeah. So the person who transliterated it, right? He transliterated it to English letters in the Roman script. He knew Arabic, but not that well. In fact, oh yeah, Bamir, Bamair, and tons of them, tons and countless examples of that, right? So mashayikh. And I said these small clues give away the person's level of Arabic. Yeah. But the thing is that you can't enforce it. What are you going to do? Nobody's going to listen to you, especially because it does not impede intelligibility. The author, let me try to steel man the opposing side's argument. If the editor of Al-Hayah were here right now, he could of course say, okay, we made a mistake, it slipped by us. But he could also say, so what? Is it the end of the world? Do you think the readers misunderstood the intention of the author? I don't think so. So then what's the problem?
Yeah.
Is that a big problem?
Yeah, but then you could also say, we'll just say it in Amiya then.
That's
He
true.
holds to actually speaking modern standard,
Mhm.
to the extent that he holds to speaking modern standard Arabic
Mhm.
correctly, he would have to take it.
That's true, but then once again, steal I agree with you. I don't like what he did. I don't like what the newspaper did. But once again, trying to be the devil's advocate,
Yes, yes.
I would speak from his perspective and say what somebody said in a forum as well. MSA is the most popular form of Arabic for the simple reason that is the only choice you have if you want to reach the entire Arab world. A very good analogy is Urdu in Pakistan.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so over there, if you want to reach all Pakistanis, just speak Urdu.
That's all you have to do.
That's simple. So MSA. But then, so anyway, you got my point.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So, what about new roots? We know it's allowed to analogize off of old roots, but coining new roots. One is like, okay, you have like maybe incorrect new roots. Like you have markaz. It's from rakaza, but then you have
Think of
tamarkaz.
that. Yeah.
So this is like, maybe you could say it's incorrect. But what about like a new triliteral root? How would, like, is that okay?
I mean, when you, okay, first of all, I can give you an example as well. Once again, from Al Haya, you can tell I was a big fan of Al Haya back in the day when I had nothing better to do. So it said muta'awlim, something like that. I could not find it in Hansware. And I should also add at this point, and the viewers might also find this useful, the latest edition of Hansware in English is literally from the 70s.
Yeah.
Okay. And there have been 2 editions since then. The 5th one came out in the 80s, and the 6th one came out in 2020. 2020, 6 years ago. The problem is neither the 5th edition nor the 6th edition has been translated into English.
Wow.
And unless you know German, you can't use it.
And they're much bigger.
They have quite a few new words. For example, when I got my the moment I got my 6th edition of Hansware, I immediately opened it up, and the first thing I checked was one of the first things I checked was because back in the day I could not find a Hansware. It means to privatize, and sure enough, it had to privatize, right? Anyway,
And this is from the category of words which is like to make a sound. Like,
no, I don't think so. It's from khas.
okay, it could be.
Khas
No, but even
to
then,
private.
there is a connection between those roots. Like, I remember reading about this one.
Onomatopoeia.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, where did the khas come from? Maybe it came from onomatopoeia.
And then there's
whispering.
also another categories of the quadliteral roots, which is like it mimics the sound that you're making. I forgot what.
Onomatopoeia, I think.
Onomatopoeia.
Yeah, yeah.
So then, if you, for example, if someone coins a new one based on a sound that he heard,
Mhm.
that should still be correct analogizing, because it goes to the heart of what the language wanted anyways. Right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the thing is that, and I was kind of trying to avoid this, but you won't let me avoid it, but I'll just say it.
Yeah.
Thing is that this is called prescription, right?
Yeah.
And in linguistics, we are trained to be descriptive rather than prescriptive. Prescriptive means, for example, what's anyways? It should be anyway. The proper way is to say anyway. Look, who died and made you king? Okay,
Yeah.
so you once again, one linguistic professor said, people scream and say, "Oh, the English language is being debased." Did you know that at one point in time it was considered wrong to say, "I was born in Boston"? He said, "I was born at Boston. I live at Boston." Okay, and at that time the purists must have screamed and said, "Oh my God, my grandkid said I was born in Boston. What's this world coming to?" Okay, and now that's the standard form, right? So in every age, the people who try to scream and nobody listens to them. And so languages change, and the language you're speaking right now is not some kind of holy thing. Of course, we could argue, no, but it is holy because it's from the Quran. Okay,
But the whole discussion we're having is comparing it to
yeah, but that's true. But when it comes to coining new words, I mean, for that we would have to. I mean, do we have any precedents where the Prophet ﷺ or the Sahaba coined new words? I don't think so, because, and in fact, from the classical era, I mean, very soon after the spread of Islam, there's a whole other discussion. But as Arabic spread and Islam spread, well, Islam spread and Arabic spread with it, obviously, it came into contact with the Byzantine Empire and Eastern Christianity, whose language was Syriac, which is a Semitic language. And the thing is that, so there was an infiltration of Greek words into Arabic, and they become a part and parcel of Arabic. For example, falsafa, philosoph. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this is related to this is from the Greek word philosophy.
Yeah.
Of course, in classical Greek it was philosophia, but in Byzantine Greek it was philosophy. So if somebody wants a purist, I would tell him or her, By your logic, we should also not say falsafa. We should not say filosof. And our classical books written not very long after the Prophet ﷺ are full of them. And of course, somebody could say, fine, those people are not, they're not prophets, they're not companions. We don't have to listen to what this person said just because he was the grandson of some companion. Fine, the kimia is from chemistry, right? Okay, so geography, it's fairly obvious from geography, right? So anyway, I'm just saying that there's who decides what's correct and what's incorrect. I kind of try to avoid making value judgments. This is the correct way, but yes, definitely people do make new routes. So for new routes, for example, you said markaza yumarkiz, to centralized. And I came across, and I could not find Han's word, so I asked one of my Arab friends, and he said, isn't it fairly obvious? It means globalization. Exactly. And I should have been able to figure that out as well, also from the context, okay? In this globalized world, blah, blah, blah. So somebody could say, no, but there's no root such as ayn, waw, lam, mim. Well, okay. What can I say? Similarly, to secularize, almana yu'alminu from almani. Almani, some people say almani means secular. The funny thing is, almani itself is borrowing from Syriac.
That makes sense, yeah. There could be a difference of opinion. Is it right, is it not?
Yeah, I can't really get into that. Because then you're asking me to make a judgment. I can't make a judgment, but I can describe the facts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then getting into number 3 right now, the balance of the language. And we don't have to kind of go through them one by one, I guess, but like the balance of the language. So when one word, amongst a bunch of synonyms, one word becomes the favorite versus that shifts over time. Do you think that's a danger? Because the whole point, we're discussing this in light of things that could be dangerous for, let's say interpreting the Quran, for example, or other such tasks.
I would say it is, relatively speaking, not very dangerous, relatively speaking. Why? Because if you have several synonyms, or let's say in general, several words, and some of them fall out of use, that's not very dangerous. It's sad, but not dangerous, I would say. Why? I'll tell you what our Hebrew professor said back in the day. On literally the first day of the very first class, our professor, who was from UPenn, Pennsylvania, he said, people often ask me if a person who speaks modern Hebrew, the kind that's spoken on the streets of Jerusalem today, would be able to pick up the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, which we're about to study, because this is a course in classical Hebrew, and I'm here to teach you classical Hebrew, that's what he said. And would he be able to understand the Old Testament? A speaker of modern Hebrew, would he be able to understand that? And he said the answer is, he would understand much of it, but not all of it. And some of what he thinks he understands, he misunderstands. So I think his point was, if a speaker of modern Hebrew from Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, whatever, came across an unfamiliar word, he would simply put a mental question mark on it and then go and ask his local rabbi at the local synagogue, or nowadays just Google it, in fact, right? You got Hebrew Wikipedia, you got Hebrew Wiktionary. There's tons of resources out there in Hebrew and other languages as well. That's not a danger. Why is it a danger? At most, a little inconvenient, right? The real danger is when he thinks he knows the meaning of the word, does not. For example, staw. Staw is related to shita. Shita in Arabic, Quran also, shita. Shita was saif. Ta, staw, because the sheen becomes a seen, but this is, of course, not comparative Semitics. In the Bible, it occurs, I think, once, and it means winter. Shita also means winter in Arabic. But in modern Hebrew, it means autumn or fall, okay? That word occurred once in the Bible, not a big deal, but you get my point. Yeah. A modern speaker of Hebrew, there's no way he could know that over here, the intended meaning is not fall, it's winter. Coming back to Arabic, same thing in Arabic. The real danger is when a person opens the Quran, an Arab opens the Quran, Sahih al-Bukhari, Muslim, etc., or some book of fiqh or whatever, and reads it, starts reading it, and comes across an unfamiliar word, or for that matter, an unfamiliar grammatical construction. That's not a danger. He's going to go and ask his local imam, or just Google it, in fact, nowadays, right? All the Google's not always that reliable. But the danger is when he thinks he knows the meaning of the word, but he does not.
Let's get into this. Let's drill down on this, because these categories are long, and basically the false friends, right?
These are false friends.
These are false friends, and they're going to be sprinkled across these 6 categories. So now let's just talk about those specifically. What are, in your view, Because I guess we can both agree, like, even between modern standard Arabic and classical Arabic, it is still like 98, 99%, right? So the dangers only maybe like we have differences. That there are a lot of differences. Even with a lot, it's still very small. But the false friends are very less, right? But what are those false friends that really pose a challenge?
Right. So I should point out that I completely agree with you that for the most part, classical Arabic and MSA are the same. And that's why when I teach Arabic, I don't go out of my way. I say I'm teaching Arabic,
Yeah.
but in the footnotes, and when I give my students notes, in the footnotes and in class also, I say, oh, by the way, you would say BTW, right? By the way, in modern standard Arabic, this sentence would be taken to mean this instead, right?
Yeah.
For example, ask any Arab what thalaja means, he's going to say refrigerator, right? In classical Arabic, it meant thalaj meant a seller of ice, and thalaja meant a female seller of ice, right? Once again, this is not a problem because here the context will show you, okay, there's no way that Abu Jahl was talking about a refrigerator. That's an added meaning. That's not a problem. But coming to the issues, the places where the context will not suffice to will not suffice to alert the modern reader that he or she's making a mistake.
Like istijab.
Yeah, istijar. Yeah, istijar is a good example. We go examples. So, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I think I'm not a hafiz, so if I make a mistake, please let me know. You're a hafiz, mashallah. Okay, the meaning over here is actually the same meaning that's used in modern standard Arabic, study. And we had not given them scriptures which they would study, right? No problem, because the meaning of darasa yadrusu is the same in CA and MSA, except that there's an additional meaning of that in CA, which is, I wouldn't say that it's extinct in MSA, but definitely the average Arab would not know it, okay? It's to fade away. So for example, in one hadith, or in one saying of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, it تذاكروا هذا الحديث وتزاوروا. In one hadith, or in one saying of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, it تذاكروا هذا الحديث وتزاوروا. Recall the hadith amongst yourselves and visit each other. That is, what's implied is visit each other to discuss the hadith. فَإِنَّكُمْ إِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا يَدْرُسْ. For indeed, if you do not, as in if you don't do this, it'll study. Okay, maybe it's yudras. It will be studied. That's also makes no sense. Yadrus, yudras, whatever, it doesn't make any sense. It is yadrus. It means it will, okay? And so this meaning would not be obvious. It might be obvious to some very highly educated Arab, but the average Arab would not know. He would be puzzled. He would be scratching his head. And if he's puzzled, once again, it's not that big a deal because the fact that he's puzzled means that it's not a problem.
Yeah.
He's going to go and ask scholar. The problem is when he says, "Oh, I know what this means." Yeah, yeah. I'll give you one more example, then I'll come to some real better examples. Yeah, but I'll give one example of this. The Prophet ﷺ, this, by the way, this one was from Sunan Darimi, the saying of Sayyidina Ali. But in Sunan Ibn Majah, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Yadrusul Islama kama yadrusu wash thawbi." Or kama qala Nabi ﷺ. Islam will fade away. It's obviously in the end of times, right? Eschatology, in the end of times, near the Day of Judgment, Islam will fade away just as the embroidery of a garment fades away, right? So here the meaning is not Islam will study or he will study Islam or whatever, right? Once again, it's not a huge deal. The average Arab will know that he doesn't understand the hadith properly, and he'll go and ask a scholar. Now, coming to what you said, idha and in, this is an issue, definitely. Back in the day, I started noticing a slight divergence between, I would kind of get puzzled because I would see idha used 24/7, the media everywhere, right? And what's wrong with that? What's wrong with being 24/7? Idha means when, right? I thought, yeah, it means when. That's what the books say, the classical books. But it doesn't really fit into this context because it'd be stuff like an Arab said to me, "Oh, Masha, learning Arabic." So, yeah. And I said, "Yeah, Arabic is difficult." He said, No, it's not difficult. Idha hawalta, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, that's really strange because it seems to mean when you try, you will succeed. Shouldn't it be? If you try, you'll succeed. Okay, not a big deal. But these small things piled up. It's not just one incident or two incidents or a dozen incidents, incident after incident in different contexts. And I really thought, it really seems to me that they're trying to say if. So one thing, and I picked up my trusty Hans word, and sure enough, it said, "Idha" means if. And then I checked Teach Yourself Arabic by, I think, John Mace. This is the old edition in the 90s. I don't know when it was published, but I bought it in the 90s. And John Mace, to his credit, explicitly said, I'm grateful to the author for this. He said, the difference between idha and in. The general impression is that in is becoming less and less frequent in MSA, and whatever meaning, whatever difference of nuance existed between the two is being eroded. And I thought, that explains it. That explains why I hardly ever hear in being used, except in some stereotype expressions, inshallah, because those are fossilized, they're frozen. They're frozen forms, right? Inshallah not going to change to idha inshallah because of Quran and Hadith, right? Okay, but aside from the fossil expressions that are copied and pasted from the Quran and Hadith, aside from that, idha rules. Everywhere you say idha. If you want to go, we can go. Idha shi'ta falnadhab. Instead of in shi'ta, etc. And what problem will this cause? The most fairly obvious problem is that when people are reading the Quran and Hadith, they're going to take idha to mean in. And for example, there was a Syrian person, an Arab, obviously Syrians are Arabs, and he started saying, إذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعاني فليستجيبوا لي وليؤمنوا بي لعلهم يرشدون. And I was sitting there listening to him. He's giving the Friday khutbah, the sermon, and he said, translated as, if my people ask you about me. And of course, I couldn't interrupt the khutbah. And even after the khutbah was over, I thought, like, what's the point? I mean, it's like whack-a-mole, right? I'm going to correct one person. Correcting one person is going to change everything, as if this person is the editor of Al Haya and he's the president of the Majma Lughat Al Arabiya in Cairo. Exactly. One person not going to change anything. Okay, so I told myself, let me conserve my energy, right? Okay, so I never pointed out to him.
But what was the problem?
But the problem was that this is not what it means. It means when my servants ask you about me, right? This is one example. You can go on, and the opposite direction also happens, although that's arguably not that big a problem. It's a relatively small problem when a person from, let's say, the Indian subcontinent who studied in the seminaries over there, he picks up, on WhatsApp, he receives a message forwarded, on WhatsApp, and it says, oh, Sheikh Yusuf Qardawi's latest statement or whatever, anything, right? This latest article published at Al-Ahram. And he starts reading me, thinks, okay, when this happens, that's not the intention of the author, okay? And so that's the opposite direction. The person who only knows the classical meaning, reading modern text, but what's far more consequential is the modern person reading classical text, right? And you can imagine if this modern person, the classical person, are having a conversation, and the classical person says, إِذَا جَاءَ يَوْمُ الْقِيَامَةِ, he's trying to say, when the day of judgment comes. And the modern Arab is taking it to mean if the day of judgment comes, which from his perspective would be blasphemous. To express doubt about a fundamental tenet of Islam, Christianity, etc. is blasphemous, right? No, that's not what he meant. He meant when. And you can open up the hadith and you can say, oh, it's puzzling. So you scratch your head, where the modern will scratch his head, right? So this is one word or two words, but it very well, in is not used that much, but idha, it's a very high frequency word.
Yeah.
So that's a matter
of
the
true false friend.
The true false friend.
The true false friend that will cause a person to be convicted in what he believes. So yeah, this means this, obviously.
He's never going to ask
a
scholar.
Someone, yeah.
And so much so, I asked on a forum, I asked some Arabs, and one of them said, and she was, from the looks of it, from her other replies over the years on the forum, it seems she was a highly educated Arab, right? So she said, no, I think only an Arab who is really specialized in linguistics would be aware of this nuance of the in idha thing. She said 99.9% Arabs would not be aware of this. She's a highly educated Arab herself.
Are there any other false friends that you would say other than idha and in? Clear false friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Sa'id, ask any Arab what Sa'id means. Happy. Back in the day, my mom used to buy happy cow, the triangular cheese, whatever. So it said Baqara Sa'ida. Okay? Sa'id in classical Arabic means fortunate, lucky. And it's interesting, it's a pair of words, shaqi. Sure enough, in classical Arabic, shaqi means unfortunate, unlucky. And in modern Arabic, it actually has two meanings. One is unhappy, so happy, unhappy. Sa'id, shaqi. The other meaning is kind of funny. I find it funny. It's mischievous, naughty.
Kid, you would say.
Waladun shaqi. Yeah, أنت ولد شقي جدا.
هذا مشاغب يعني هذا شقي.
Yes, shaqi, exactly. Now, what's the problem? The problem is, so the Arab is reading the Quran, and the Quran says, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. يوم يأتي لا تكلم نفس إلا بإذنه فمنهم شقي وسعيد. The second part is the part I'm talking about. So from amongst them is the
Happy and mischievous.
yeah, Shaqi wa Sa'id is the unhappy and the happy. No translator, to my knowledge, has translated that way. I checked the Urdu translation, English translation, French, German translations. No, okay. It is from amongst them will be the unfortunate and the fortunate, okay, and so on and so forth, right?
So this is from
Masroor is the word for happy in classical Arabic. Masroor is still used in modern Arabic.
Masroor, Farhan.
Yeah, Farhan is like joyful. Yeah, that's fine. They're still used, but the problem does not lie in Masroor. The Masroor maybe use a little bit less than Sa'id. That's not a problem. The problem is Sa'id. You're gonna say, oh, I know what Sa'id means. It means happy.
Yeah, but in that time, like maybe even before, Sa'id had this meaning before as well, but it was like a not a dominant meaning. Or
I never come across it in dictionaries though.
Okay. So let's assume even if it was a new coinage, it's a new meaning assigned to the old one.
It's a drift. It's not a coinage. Coinage would imply it's deliberate.
I see.
No. It beggars belief that somebody it beggars belief that somebody would deliberately want to do it unless he or she was trying to corrupt the language. And even then, how would you tell people, everybody, I want you to stop using this word in the Quranic sense? Nobody will listen to you. In fact, they'll probably beat you up for that. It's what you call semantic drift and how do words change gradually. I did a whole course just on this at the University of Chicago, but I cannot summarize 9 weeks of lectures in one session. We had a separate session for that. Yeah. So we have yajibu. Yajibu, no, actually la yajibu. Okay. So let me start with the classical meaning first, okay? First, a bit of Islamic jurisprudence for viewers who might not be familiar with what I'm about to say. So fasting is considered like a good deed in Islam and Christianity, and yeah. So there are 5 days on which you are supposed to abstain from fasting. Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Adha, and the 3 days following Eid al-Adha called Ayam al-Tashriq. But never mind the terminology. 5 days. On these 5 days, you are a Muslim, according to Islamic law, is required to abstain from fasting. Fasting is Sama Yasumu. Abstaining from fasting is Aftar Yuftaru. So when two great scholars of Islam, Ahmed bin Hanbal and Ishaq bin Rahway, said, لا يجب أن يفطر أياما غير هذه الخمسة التي نهى رسول الله عنها عيد الفطر يوم الفطر ويوم الأضحى وأيام التشريق. What were they trying to say? What they're trying to say was, aside from these 5 days, you are not required to abstain. The only time a Muslim is required to abstain from fasting, the only time a Muslim is required to abstain from fasting is these 5 days. Aside from these fast days, he does not have to abstain. لا يجب أن يفطر. He doesn't have to abstain. What that means is it's very clear. You can fast if you want. You can fast if you want. It's optional. You don't have to abstain. But these 5 days, you have to abstain. If you fast these days, it's a sin. It's actually the opposite of it's a bad deed. Is that right? The meaning is fairly obvious. Anybody who's trained in classical Arabic can tell you this. Coming to modern Arabic, once again, I was with some people on a bus, and 2 of them were Arabs. And to cut a long story short, one of them was having an argument, a verbal argument with the bus driver on some issue. And the other Arab, who was the head of the group, he was talking to me, and in an aside, because I was like a second in command, also one of the few people who knew Arabic because this is in Pakistan. So in kind of an aside, he said to me, لا يجب أن يفعل هكذا. Does this mean he doesn't have to do this? I think he could do it if he wants, but it's not required for him to do this. Clearly not. He's trying to say he is required not to do this. And I confirmed this to Arabs. I asked some Arabs on a forum, on a proper forum, I asked them, and they said, yes, it means he should not do this. Yajibu, he should. La yajibu, he should not. So imagine the immense misunderstandings that arise if a modern Arabic picked up Sunan Tirmidhi and read the saying of Ahmed bin Hanbal, Ishaq bin Rahway in Sunan Tirmidhi.
And this is something which is also very common, where you have many, and I don't want to get into the religious side of it, but you do have many people who are not trained in classical Arabic, and then they self-study, right?
And because they're Arabs, they feel they're qualified to read on their own, independent study.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have 3 false friends right now. Let's get a couple more in, because I think this is the crux of this is the meat of it.
And to support what you just said, I believe it was Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, I'm not sure, who gave the following example. I think it was him. There was a person in some Arab country, maybe Mauritania, and a student, and he was reading some difficult book of something, some religious text, and a scholar passed by him and said, "Oh, you shouldn't read that text without a teacher." And the student replied, "Don't worry. Whenever I come across something I don't understand, I go to a teacher and ask him." And the scholar said, "The danger is when you think you've understood, but you've misunderstood." As in his point was, who you're going to decide what you understand, what you don't understand. That's very dangerous, right? Same thing over here. Yeah, at the University of Chicago, I wrote my master's thesis on lan. So lan, that's not a perfect example of false friend, but it's in the same domain. It's in the same domain. It's instructive. It's instructive. It's a semi false friend, I would say. Let's put it that way. What do I mean by that? In modern standard Arabic, you can ask any Arab. You can pick up Hans Were. It says lan means will not. Hans Were, I checked it actually a little while ago. It said it means not, but it added in parentheses for the future, for negating the future only. You don't say, "I'm not eating. I'm not fasting today. Lan asuma." No, it means I will not fast. That's the only meaning lan asuma can have into a modern Arab. In classical Arabic, there are 3 opinions, we say madahib, 3 opinions on the meaning of lan. It's a divisive issue. One meaning is that it means the exact same thing that it means in modern Arabic, will not. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. لا تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون. According to this meaning, it means you will not attain piety until you spend from that which you love. As in, you got to spend what you really love, to attain piety. Another meaning, which is the only meaning I was taught in seminary, was never. So it means you definitely, it's the future. It's negative. It's the future, but there's an additional thing, an additional nuance, which is perpetuity, from now until the day of judgment, right? And of course, I'm not going to try to summarize my entire master thesis. It's 36 pages long. But give you one example. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. لن أكلم اليوم إنسيا. Sayyidatuna Maryam alayhi salam, Mary, the Virgin Mother, the mother of Jesus Christ, Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, in the Quran, she says, according to the first meaning, I will not speak to a human being today. And this meaning makes perfect sense. But if you take the other meaning, I will never, then it seems a little strange to me, at least to my ears. I will never talk to a human being today. Why would you say I will never talk to a human being and immediately qualified with today? Anyway, this is a long topic.
The chronological limitation on something which is supposed to be structurally unlimited.
Yeah, why would you then why didn't you just say لا أكلم اليوم إنسيا? It doesn't really make that much sense to me, at least. And I could be wrong. I could be told all wet on this, but that is my take.
Or it could also be that sometimes, like when they're teaching in those curriculums, they give a very simplified kind of understanding with the knowledge that are their exceptions.
Except that we were not told that there's other opinions. We were told that there are different opinions on how to pray, on fasting, on pilgrimage, but this is one thing we were not told about.
It could be like a pedagogical issue.
Maybe, yeah.
So what's the third opinion?
Yeah, the third opinion, as far as I know, is not popular at all. It is slightly different from the second opinion. Actually, I would say it's quite different, but it seems to be quite similar. It adds emphasis. And somebody might say, well, isn't that what never is? Never is. Never means negation in the future, forever, perpetually. Isn't that emphasis? Not quite. Emphasis means negation in the future at a certain point. What's the difference? Let's say I have a cold. I don't want to infect everybody else. And you tell me to come to the mosque. You say, come on, it's time for Isha. Let's go. Don't be lazy, okay? And I say, no, I'm not being lazy. The thing is, I have a cold, okay? So and you say, come on, it's okay. And I'm saying, don't you understand what I just said? I'm not going, okay? And you say, no, come on. I say, lan adhhaba ila masjidi. According to the third opinion, according to the first one, it's simple. It means I won't go. Yeah. According to the third opinion, it also makes sense because it means I'm definitely not going. At this point in time, at 10:35 p.m., I'm definitely not going. But according to the second opinion, it means I'm never going for the rest of my life until the day of judgment, right? So yeah, it doesn't make any sense. So the third opinion says it's emphasis at a certain point in the future, right? But as far as I know, this is not a popular opinion at all. I've never heard of people espousing this. But the first opinion is the standard one nowadays. And my entire master's thesis was spent trying to prove that this is the correct opinion. But of course, I could be wrong.
Which one?
That the first opinion is the
The
correct
first
one.
one.
That means simply will not.
Yeah, I think that.
This is a very long topic, but you
Yeah.
can read my master's thesis if you want
Yeah.
to know more about
And
it.
I think like at least someone who's trying to be trained in classical Arabic, he would need to be aware of.
Exactly. Especially because if some later scholar who was trying to write in classical Arabic used it to mean the third one, second one, and you're only aware of the first one, it won't make sense to you why he said this. You'll be scratching your head. Why would he say this over here?
Wow. Wow.
Exactly.
Any more or should...
Yeah, we can give some more examples as well. Actually, since we're on this topic, we can talk about some more categories. Do you want to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me mention a couple more categories. So we had finished 3, and then so we mentioned old phrases that lost social meaning, right?
Mhm.
So these would be things that are like قاتلك الله, ثكلتك أمك, لا أبا لك. Another one is like a sentence structure changing. And actually this is very interesting because there was a study done by someone called David Wilmsman or something like that. What he did is he was trying to challenge this claim that, okay, MSA is the same across the Arab world. And
Oh, you mean synchronically?
yes,
Okay.
synchronically. So then what he did is that, when big story, there were big stories that came out, and they would be covered by the Arabs in the Levant, as well as Arabs in Egypt, as well as in other places.
Mhm.
So he did a study checking how they cover the same story, right?
Mhm.
And the sentence structures. He did a syntactical analysis basically on those stories. Because why? They're both writing on the same thing. So he's trying to see if there's something structurally that again and again the Egyptians reproduce that is different than what the Levantines reproduce again and again.
Mhm.
So one example, and I'm going to make it very simple, is, for example, in one story, a woman had given a man something. So the Levantines, and I don't remember exactly which one said it in which way, but let's say the Levantines, they said, سلمته له, سلمته له. She gave it to him, right? Or she gave him it.
Mhm.
But the Egyptians, they said it سلمتها أو سلمته إياها,
Mhm.
or it was the other way around. I don't remember. Which means she. So it's just a change. You have مفعول به أول and ثاني, which means the two objects,
Mhm.
and one is putting it this way, one is putting it that way.
Mhm.
Now, okay, that's fine. They're both valid.
Mhm.
They're both valid in terms of classical Arabic, at least according to the rules. But when you look deeper, the reason the Levantines were doing it like this was because in their colloquial dialect, this is the ra'ij and the common pattern.
Yeah.
Whereas the Egyptians, they had the opposite pattern.
Mhm.
So their syntactical structures of their colloquial dialects was actually surfacing up to their modern standard Arabic.
Absolutely.
So this is something amazing, actually, that it shows how these different their own local dialects, how they were surfacing and changing the sentence structure. And now you may say, for example, okay, we talked about false friends, right? So false friends is is totally okay, but even if we consider all the other things that are not necessarily dangerous, if there's no check on them, and someone is trying to like, insofar as we want MSA to be close to CA, it's not in you can't just have a very like logical nahwi approach. You also need to look at the balaghi structures, meaning the rhetorical structures or the syntactical. Yeah, of course, even nahu. But what I mean is a sentence structure can be correct in nahu, but still, when you do an analysis, you won't find something in that structure.
Yes, absolutely.
And there's and actually one other thing is, okay, modern standard Arabic, this is not necessarily a modern phenomenon, right?
Mhm.
Like even 300 years ago, there was their modern standard
Yep.
Arabic. 400.
It's a gradual
It's
process.
a gradual process.
Mhm.
And when you look at Mukhtarat of Sheikh Abul Hassan Ali Nadawi, he
Mhm.
actually has a beautiful like kind of progression, right? Where he brings up the adab and the literature of people in different, synchronically and what was it, the other one?
Diachronically.
Diachronically, right? Synchronically and diachronically. And he showed how they express themselves differently, right? So someone in Egypt in the 1500s would express themselves differently than someone in Bilad al-Sham in the 1300s. So the sentence structures have continuously changed. And I guess like someone who is interested in like speaking classical Arabic, right? Speaking a form of MSA which is very close to CA, then for them they would kind of find that like more appealing to kind of match the sentence structures as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah, this comes to back to prescription. If somebody wants to consciously imitate a model,
Okay.
then he might want to pick classical Arabic. But even
That
over
would be
there,
their personal reason.
that is a personal choice. But even over there, the thing is that because in the day and age we live in, with YouTube, with WhatsApp, with Facebook, you if you record a message, if it's a personal message, that's different. But if you're sending you make a video in classical Arabic, and you cannot, how are you going to make sure that your Arab audience interprets what you had in mind? Because the moment you say idha, your Arab audience will take it to mean if. So if, for example, I'm giving a talk, let's say I'm talking to a Muslim audience and I say, so when Sayyidina Bilal and the Prophet ﷺ enter heaven, إذا دخل بلال الحبشي والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم الجنة, I can guarantee you that 99 point, in fact, let's say 100% of Arabs will take this to mean if Bilal and Muhammad enter heaven, which would be blasphemous from their perspective, right? And of course, then I have to probably add a subtitle, whatever, something over there saying, oh, by BTW, by the way, this is the meaning of this, okay? So I mean, unless I restrict myself to only talking to people who are similarly trained and ignoring the other 99% of people, whatever. But you got to be aware of these things. That's all I'm trying to say.
And this is actually a really good and important point that you bring up here. That MSA, like if you come from a classical background, classical Arabic background, you're thinking that MSA is just classical, maybe
because all the Fusha, umbrella term.
Yeah, but in reality, what you're saying is that look, the purpose of MSA, the way it's alive today, is not even really to imitate classical Arabic. It is to communicate with the Arabs.
But I would say that Arabs do try their best to imitate classical Arabic. Actually, no, the thing is that, we should not call al-Fusha an umbrella term, because that would imply that the Arabs are aware that under the umbrella term, there are different varieties. They don't know that. Is that an umbrella term? Is just one thing. And the only difference as far as they're concerned is the addition of new words, hatif. Of course, television, those are borrowings. Television and radio are borrowings. Never mind that. That's obvious. Even a kid can figure that out. I'm talking about hatif, sayyara, hasub, fallaja, barada. They would say, yeah, these are new words. Ashuriyya, communism, al-ishtirakiyya, socialism, right? Jumhuriya, republic. They would say that's the extent of the difference. There are some words that are added, and of course they'll admit, yeah, we do occasionally let some local Arabic slip into our but they say that's it. So it's not an umbrella term. The only thing is one thing. It's a monolith. This is dangerous, actually.
And again, we're referring to like people who, of course, there are going to be many Arabs who actually study even classical Arabic very deeply, because in their curriculum they do have classical Arabic. So a smart student may know all of these differences.
I would say that's only possible if the teacher points them out, but I don't think that the teachers themselves would be aware of these differences. Okay, let me give another example. I'm pretty sure that, I mean, you find me an Arab who actually is aware of the difference, is aware of the fact that in classical Arabic, idha does not mean if. Find me an Arab who knows that, okay? Aside from some Arab who studied in the Indian subcontinent. It's funny, it's ironic that the Arabs or people who studied in a non-Arab environment learn Arabic in a different way, and I would say in a more accurate way. But then again, even over there, we have the issue that lan, they only know one meaning of lan. But I'll give you one example.
This is like a pretty anecdotal. So it is possible. I get what you're saying, and I also echo this and the same sentiment. But I guess there will be somebody who feels very strongly the other way. So for you, if you're that way,
I will simply ask that person to tell me. I will ask that person to perform an experiment. Go to your Arab friends and go to those Arab friends of yours who you think are highly educated, who got PhDs, masters, who are in journalism, whatever, highly educated Arab friends, okay? Not some random Arab off the streets of Cairo. And ask them the meaning of this verse from the Quran. Not this verse. Do a Google search of idha in the Quran, pick 5 or 6 or 10 of them, and ask them what they mean. I can guarantee you always say if. One example, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم أدخل يدك في جيبك تخرج بيضاء من غير سوء. Right? The meaning of jayb. Ask any Arab check the latest edition of Hans Word, it says pocket. أدخل يدك في جيبك, that's not what it meant. In classical Arabic, jayb had one literal meaning and one metaphorical meaning, neither of which was pocket. What is the literal meaning of jayb? I checked several dictionaries and said, the opening at the chest and neck of the shirt. So أدخل يدك meant over here, right? That's the literal meaning. Another ayah, وَلْيَضْرِبْنَا بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ. Did I recite it correctly? وَلْيَضْرِبْنَا, right? Not فَلْيَضْرِبْنَا. وَلْيَضْرِبْنَا, yeah. The meaning over here is chest, the metaphorical meaning. Let them draw their veils over their chests, right? About women. Neither the meaning of pocket did not exist in classical Arabic. Show me a single dictionary that has this meaning, right? And conversely, ask any Arab what the meaning of jayb is, and he'll say, of course it means a pocket. Everybody knows it, right? This is a very good example of false friend.
That is very good. Yeah. So another example, which is like not false friend, is like in the different more conjugation types that we studied, the different tables. There are certain tables which are completely omitted, like you won't hear ta'kid bin nun taqida.
That's what I think.
Like they yaf'alan on at least I don't I've not heard it that much. You don't.
No.
Or for example bin nun al khafifa, which is the yaf'alan. You don't. That's just not going to be.
Or lamma plus mudari majzoom.
Yeah.
Lamma yadhhab.
Exactly.
It is non-existent in the
Another like ayat that like for example. Sentence structures that are not used. وَإِمَّا يَنْزَغَنَّكَ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ نَزْغٌ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ وَإِنْ مَا يَنْزَغ. Now this ma here is za'ida, right? It's like an extra ma.
Okay. In plus ma.
In plus ma. And then the in is a mukhaffafa actually. So it's وَإِمَّا يَنْزَغَنَّكَ if a like a deviation strikes you, right, from shaitan, from Satan, مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ نَزْغٌ, or a pulling, right? فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ. And then seek refuge from Allah. So here you actually have an emphasis in the shart, in the conditional, not in the jawab shart, which is very, like, you wouldn't hear anybody speak like that. But then again, like, okay, another question is how representative is the Quran of everyday speech?
Yes.
Another thing.
Yes. The words out of my mouth. Yeah. So trying to imitate the Quran is probably not the best idea, because even if you'd go back, if you could get a time machine and go back 40 centuries in the time machine, if you started speaking Arabic like the Quran, people would know that's not natural. Yeah, that too, absolutely, right? So and that's why when I teach Arabic, I actually do not draw on the Quran most of the time. I usually draw on the Hadith, and not just the Hadith. It could literally be the sayings of the enemies of Islam, Abu Jahl. All we care about is the person native speaker. And somebody could say, well, isn't the Quran also in correct Arabic? I would say, of course it's in correct Arabic, but that is not natural speech. We want the natural speech of the native speakers. Yeah, it's actually literally supernatural speech, right? The beginner needs, if you're teaching English to a student, to some immigrant, whatever, you start with Stephen King's novels. Shakespeare would not be, well, Shakespeare, that's kind of old, that's a different era, but you start with Stephen King, John Grisham. I don't think he's going to get very far, okay? Even now, even after having, I mean, I don't want to show off, but on the GRE verbal exam, I got 169 out of 170. I had 1 point, 1 point shy of a perfect score, despite, absolutely, okay? And I'm a master from the University of Chicago. Despite that, I was reading a novel, and in that, it had the word raise. And you're going to say raise is a very simple verb. Yes, it is, but it said, let's raise the general, okay? I was like, what does this mean? And I had to comb through a dictionary, and I found a meaning, and it said this also means in military parlance and military jargon. Do you know what? Have you come across it before? R-A-Z-E? R-A-I-S-E, to raise, the same verb as to raise. It's a very specific meaning of the verb to raise. It means to establish communication with somebody. It is really very restricted. I mean, if in all my years, after reading, being a person who's a bookworm, okay, I did not know this meaning, okay? So I'm just saying that, so imagine that somebody, some non-native speaker reads this book and says, well, let me start using this, okay? And he's going to Walmart and Kroger and he's using it over there. How many native speakers can understand him, okay? So the Quran is not a good model to imitate.
And simply because it is supernatural, whereas the hadith corpus, the poetry, or anything else, the sayings of the companions, all these things were more everyday speech, right? So this is why that
Yeah.
would be more representative of.
Representative and simple structures. Yeah.
But at the same time, like even this ayah that I mentioned, it has a different sentence structure, but it would have to have some sort of anchor in everyday speech. So, for example, let's say every language
It had to have been comprehensible to the audience.
yeah, that's
That's the assumption that they're going to understand what
But in
Allah is saying.
everyday language, you have like you always have the high register and the low
Mhm,
register, right?
mhm.
So I guess something which is extremely eloquent would predominantly use the high register and also combine things in a way which is like even more like high register, even more eloquent. So, but I get what you're saying. But at the same time, we can't say like every single thing in the Quran is, it's something which, if we could, well, I guess a better way is like, okay, just find the same sentence structure in the hadith or
Yeah, yes, absolutely. That's what I try to do. Yeah.
exactly.
I'll give you one more example of a false friend that slipped in my mind earlier. So, kadaba yakzibu. Now, everybody knows it means to lie. The question is, how do you say he lied to her? In classical Arabic, kadhabaha. I didn't say kadhaba, not from bab tafil, not from the second conjugation, first one. Kadhabaha, he lied to her. This is how you say it in standard in classical Arabic. In modern standard Arabic, there are two ways of saying it: kadhabaha or kadhaba alayha. In classical Arabic, kadhaba alayha means something quite different. It means he lied about her. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ويقول الأشهاد هؤلاء الذين كذبوا على ربهم. This verse does not mean, and the witnesses will say, these are the people who lied to their Lord. You don't lie to your Lord, lied about their Lord.
Or against.
Against or about the Lord. They fabricated a lie about God, not they lied to God. What does that mean? You lied to God. Similar in the hadith, it's a long hadith, but I'll give you part of it. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Lan akziba ala Allahi azza wa jal." This does not mean I will not or never. That depends on the meaning that you pick for lan, but that's a separate issue. I will not or I will never lie to Allah, lie about Allah. Another hadith, my last example for this verb. لا تكذبوا علي فإنه من كذب علي فليلج النار فليلج النار أو كما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Do not lie to me, for indeed he who lies to me, let him enter fire. Do not lie about me, as in don't fabricate sayings about me. For indeed he who fabricates lies about me, let him enter hell. He'll go to hell visibly.
Could this also be open to both being correct based on the meaning of, the context? The huruf al-jar, like ala, they have different meanings and they can hold different meanings. Is it possible that ala could allow for both?
In classical Arabic, as I've checked, I've based on my research, kadhaba followed by ala has only one meaning: to lie about, to lie concerning somebody, right? Other example, I can do more examples, but never mind.
So I want to transition to another point here, which is the final thing that I want to end with, the final like chapter of this podcast, which is, okay, you have the colloquial dialects.
And I'll just add that you take this verse of the Quran and these two ahadith and show them to any Arab. I can guarantee you 99% of them will say it means lied to, right? Was he dangerous? And I checked. I checked Han's friend. I checked Hans word. To my dismay, Hans word only gave this meaning of kadhabala. It didn't list the classical meaning and the modern meaning, which is fine because Hans word is simply describing the language. He's not prescribing, describing. He's not to blame. All I'm saying is, the fact is, no Arab in the 21st century or even the last century would have taken this to mean lied about. It means lied to. And I confirmed with an Arab friend of mine. I said, "What is a journalist for, I think, Al Jazeera? He's a journalist." And I said, "What does it mean?" I made it. I said, "What is the meaning of kadaba aliyya?" And he said very clearly, said, "Lied to me." Anyways.
So now coming to the colloquial dialects, which we defined at the beginning of this podcast as what is spoken today, right?
Yeah, what a child learns without study.
What a child learns without study, right? So usually learners of the Arabic language, including classical Arabic, especially classical Arabic, they consider the they consider the dialects as pretty much useless and very much something to stay safe from, stay away from, steer away from, right? But this is something I want to challenge. Like, is this so? Because here's a hypothesis, and many people have actually spoken about this. It's not a hypothesis, but it's something that occurred to me as a hypothesis, and I looked at it more and more. And I actually drew a Venn diagram of these four different categories. One is like classical Arabic ecosystem. Then you have formalized classical Arabic. So formalized classical Arabic is a complete subset of the classical Arabic ecosystem, right? Because the classical Arabic ecosystem, as we discussed, there are like 40 or more dialects that were spoken at the time of the Prophet. And what was formalized, and as we discussed, that they strove to encapsulate everything, right? But it's not necessary that every single element of language, every single dialectical feature was preserved with the author, right?
Yeah.
So inevitably, FCA or formalized classical Arabic is going to be a complete full subset of classical Arabic ecosystem without anything coming out of this larger circle.
Yeah, it's a subset. Yeah.
It's a subset. It's a complete subset. So then you have modern standard Arabic, right, which we just discussed. So modern standard Arabic is a partial subset of classical Arabic ecosystem, but it also has some, like we mentioned, the false friends, whatever. So that would be maybe a little bit that comes outside of it.
And of course, new meanings assigned to old words, and of course, wholesale borrowing, television, radio, computer.
I can also show this on the camera for anyone who's watching. You can just pause it and follow this. So this is the Venn diagram that drew. So you have modern standard Arabic. It shares with classical Arabic ecosystem, obviously, and it's like very close. I would say it's like 99% or 98% of FCA, which is formalized classical Arabic, but it's still like smaller. It's still smaller than, or it has overlap with classical Arabic ecosystem, and there's still more that's left there. Now comes the colloquial dialects, and this is where it gets interesting. So certainly the colloquial dialects, they overlap with MSA and FCA, right? But now the question is that there are certain things in the dialects which were like, okay, that's obviously not Fusha. Me intending thereby that it's neither MSA nor classical Arabic.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? But there is a huge chunk of the classical Arabic ecosystem, especially those dialects that were spoken from other Arabs of the time. And those people continue to live. They pass their language down. But their rules...
It might be undocumented.
Undocumented.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of proof. There's one doctor, not medical doctor, a professor from Kuwait. His name is Dr. Ali Al-Jafari. And he speaks on this, like he has a beautiful a couple podcasts on this topic on YouTube. So he connects the qira'at of Quran and the different recitations, and then also even he takes into account the non-mutawatir ahad recitations, the recitations that were transmitted, not mass transmitted, they were transmitted with single chains of narration. So he takes those into account, and there's many works of scholars in the past. He's just a contemporary voice, but he mentions patterns between today's dialects and then dialectical features that were that existed in the past. And he's saying that we consider that, oh, this is not Fusha. Why? Because when we think Fusha, we're only thinking of the rules that
the documented features.
Not only the document, even in the documented features, there are things that are documented, but they're tucked away because
hardly, people are not aware of them. Yeah.
People are not aware of them, but they were really spoken widely and used widely. So today he's saying that no, there are many features that are such that are Fusha, purely Fusha. Like for example, alayhum. This is very common, right? And we even have qira'a غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين, right? But there are many more actually, and there's a list of certain dialectical features that I have here. So for example, one is this one is I found interesting. Al-tamtamaniya. Al-tamtamaniya is for lam al-ta'rif, which is alif lam al at the beginning of a noun, which makes it definite. Well, but yeah, the lam is substituted for a meme.
Oh yeah.
So you have the hadith, right? Laysa min birri am siyamu fim safa. So this is a hadith which is attributed to the Prophet, that he said it like this, according to the dialect, I think, of the people of Yemen. So he said to them in their own tongue.
Nur Anwar, right?
I don't remember exactly from here, but I think it's from, yeah, I've heard it from many places. But laysa minam birri, it is not from piety. Am siyamu fim safar, as siyamu fi safar, that you fast in travel. Now, okay, there may be kalam on the hadith itself, but when it comes to the actual point, it's valid. This is how they used to speak. So
somebody spoke this way.
Somebody spoke this way, and it still exists today. It still exists today in many tribes, and you could follow his contact for that. There's something else called I think it's called al-kashkasha. So when you replace the kaf of ta'nith, the dhamir muttasil, which denotes femininity, with sheen. So instead of كيف حالك, كيف حالك, كيف حالش, or كيف حالش, like this. Or instead of so this is also something that existed before, and it exists today. So there are many such like very interesting features. So the point I'm trying to make is that, okay, there are many dialectical features which we think that are not fusha in the local dialects, but they actually are fusha. But if they're in the undocumented subset of the classical Arabic ecosystem, there's no way to know.
Yeah.
And if they're in the sparsely documented, you have to really dive deep to know. Right.
I would say one thing that for the longest time we all felt that the classical Arabic corpus is a closed corpus in the sense that we can't get any new material, right? Well, of course, it is always possible to find some rare, ancient collection of some sayings hidden in some, well, whatever, some caves like the Dead Sea Scrolls, whatever, right? For Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek. But for the most part, it's a closed corpus. But recently, I spoke to Dr. Ahmed Jalad. I've spoken to him just last year, and that deserves a whole separate podcast. But we had a lunch together, and he has basically deciphered many inscriptions on rocks. The problem was that you might say, well, were people blind? Could they see the inscriptions? They weren't blind, but they couldn't read them because not all of them were in the Arabic script. They were in, literally, some of them were in Greek letters. Like nowadays, people write Urdu, Hindi, and Roman, right? Kya hale, Kya, whatever, right? So imagine an Arab who's more educated in Greek than his native language, and maybe he grew up in the Byzantine Empire, right? But he spoke Arabic at home, so he's trying to figure out how to write a message in Arabic. So he used the Greek letters, like Roman Urdu, like basically texting, and he's not very good at his native language. I mean, speaking fine, not writing. He's not literate, right? Especially the diaspora over here. Okay. It's not just that. It's also because the Arabic script was in its infancy, and because there was, of course, that there were no dots initially. Not only was there no tashkil, fatha, kasra, dhamma, there were no dots, which meant that even if that Arab had been completely proficient in the Arabic script, the Arabic script was not a very good medium for writing back then, because you write one word, is it mahabba or is it mihna? You can't tell, right? Yes, but if you write in the Greek script, it is very clear, so much so that you can even tell the i'rab, the tashkil at the end of the word from the Greek, because in Greek you're gonna write all the letters. Anyway, so I'm saying that we're getting more material now. So actually, it's almost like we're going back in the past and getting new information about the old dialects. But anyway, that's a whole nother topic. Yeah.
So my point is that even with like some of the differences which we see, like the guy David Wilsham, or whatever his name was, the study that he did, those features, the syntactical features, the grammatical constructions, could actually be from their
They
own.
could absolutely, they could be, but the thing is that, okay, so I've been teaching Arabic for a number of years, and I had a Syrian student, and I had Syrian students, and one day I said to one of them, I said, your native language is the Syrian dialect, and how do you say my mother in your dialect? She said immi, and I said exactly. So we're students of classical Arabic, we will immediately jump to the conclusion that immi is a corruption of ummi, and it could be.
No, but I think that actually is one of the
Exactly
features.
No, but yeah. So I had my take was slightly different from yours, but you could be right as well. I could be wrong. You could be right. I said, instead of it being a corruption, and we agree on this, it might not be a corruption, but where did it come from? It could be from the Hebrew/Aramaic substratum that existed back in the days when Arabic was not spoken over. The Arabic was brought to Syria, the Levant later on. They're not Arabic speaking. Well, there was the Nabatean kingdom as well, but okay, but that's talking about Syria. In Syria, what is now Syria, Arabic was not spoken over there. There was Syriac, which is a dialect of Aramaic, and there was other languages as well. There's Babylonian, whatever, but not Arabic. And in Aramaic, how do you say my mother? Immi. How do you say my mother in Hebrew? Immi. Okay, this could be a remnant of the old Aramaic/Hebrew. The umbrella term for Hebrew, Aramaic, etc., is Northwest Semitic. The Northwest Semitic substratum that is still fossil left over there. Okay, so but I agree with you that, but maybe it's not that either. Maybe it's actually a dialect of Arabic. Who knows? Maybe the Arabs who came there when Islam spread were speakers whose dialect had im. It's possible.
And I mentioned this so that it gives the viewer a greater appreciation for the dialects, because the more okay, I agree with you how you mentioned earlier that you shouldn't study Fusha and the dialects together, right? Ever. But if Fusha is very deep in your mind, after that, if you study the dialects, I think there's a lot that can be unearthed,
Yes.
because I actually found like a lot of like very eloquent structures, a lot of eloquent structures that were in the dialects, and then you can very easily pull them into modern standard Arabic. So and then also like the final point is lack, like we discussed once, lack of evidence is not evidence of lack.
And yeah, the thing I'm familiar with from the University of Chicago is history professor said, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Yes, yes, yes. That's from
But except for certain times, right?
yeah.
So like if sometimes an absence of evidence, like if you have a huge data set,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because obviously a matter of induction, right? So if you say, okay, so what? So I just noticed that that person, he's late to work. Well, that's once, okay, but he's late to work every single day. Okay, that's his habit. Similarly, thing is that where you would expect something to be used, very good, and thank you for reminding me about this. You'd expect that the verb for to try is a very basic concept that I'm sure that human beings have said since time, since the beginning of time, right? So and every single language has some verb for to try, and not only does every single language have, as far as I know, have a verb for to try of all the languages I've studied, it's a very common verb that even little kids will also say, mommy, I tried, but I'm sorry, but I couldn't figure out the math question. Okay, so I'm just thinking that if hawala yuhawalu is the standard word for try in modern Arabic as any Arab, right? How come it is extremely rare in classical Arabic, okay? For the simple reason that it wasn't the standard verb for to try in Arabic, and in fact, it didn't even mean to try in Arabic. It meant to desire, to seek. For example, in a saying of the Prophet ﷺ, it's a longer saying, but I'm just giving one snippet of it, one part of it. Allahumma bika uhawilu. Oh Allah, it is by means of you alone do I seek or do I desire. That is, I seek what I want or I desire whatever, right? Probably to seek. So hawala yuhawilu was rarely used in classical Arabic, and even when it was, it did not mean to try. Okay, so this is a false friend and also an example of it's a drift. It's a drift. Not standard word for to try in modern
and you're
Arabic.
saying that we have the reason we know this is because in classical Arabic we have enough moments where it could have been used, but it
Yeah.
wasn't used. So here, basically, absence of or evidence of absence can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the case. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for
Sure.
enjoyed having you on the podcast, and to the viewers once more before we close. Reminder to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any future conversations like this with gems like this. Thank you so much for being on.
Okay, thank you.